What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you, as always, with the one, the only, the certified fantabulous. Just graded every single team's 2025 NBA trade deadline activity in just incredible time. Mr. Grant Hughes. If you haven't guessed already, this is our trade deadline reaction podcast. I would point you towards, if you're looking for breakdowns on Luka and De'Aaron Fox, and even more so the Kyle Kuzma trade. We did individual pods on those. So go back through our feed. And look, if you're here for the first time, I don't normally do this at the top anymore. Hit the subscribe button, join our Discord. The link to that's in the YouTube and podcast description. Support us in those ways. That's the best way to support us, is to subscribe on Apple and Spotify as well. And bring those ratings and reviews up for us on Apple and Spotify too. But let's talk about everything that went down. Grant, how you feeling about it all?
Kind of in a bit of a daze, because that's just always how the trade deadline feels. I do think it was helpful that a lot of big deals happened before today. So it was just for us, certainly having to wrangle information on all of these trades in a short amount of time to get stuff published. That was helpful, but it's always like a blur. So this is a helpful exercise. Also, I would say, Dan, you're untradeable. Just want to leave you with that.
That's because I just signed an extension, or is it do I have an
yeah, it's a technicality. It's got nothing to do with your value.
We tried to move you and then found out that we couldn't, and that's how we knew you were untradeable. The way we're going to frame this is we're going to go through, we'll probably end up talking about every team, but we're going to use deals as a launching point into larger trade deadlines, and that's how it works every year. It's a little chaotic. It's a lot of fun, but let's dig into it. We begin with Jimmy Butler to the Golden State Warriors, and this is going to end up being a 6-team trade. So I'm just going to go through the details. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it on screen. The Pistons received Dennis Schroeder, Lindy Waters III, so they won the trade, obviously. Milwaukee's 2027 second, Dallas's 2031 second. Golden State receives Jimmy Butler, who is signing a 2-year, $111 million extension following this trade. The Miami Heat are receiving Kyle Henderson, some drama there, we'll get to it, Davion Mitchell, Andrew Wiggins, Golden State's 2025 first-round pick that is top 10 protected through 2027. The 76ers, I'm sure there's a fake second-rounder involved in there, but I haven't seen the exact details, but they did create a $7.98 million traded player exception. The Toronto Raptors received a PJ Tucker and a 2026 second-round pick. It is coming from the Lakers, and it came from Miami, and they will get cash as well. And finally, the Utah Jazz are getting KJ Martin, Josh Richardson, a 2028 second-round pick. That's still, Detroit has a few of those, but it's coming from Detroit. A 2031 second-round pick that'll be coming from Miami, and it's the less favorable of Indiana and Miami. Just as a forewarning, there will be other this is going to be more of a Pistons Warriors Heat thing. So I think we need to start with Grant. The Warriors did it after telling us that they wouldn't, and then becoming desperate to get anybody. And look, if I'm Jimmy Butler, I walk in and say, Kevin Durant over me. Is that what they tried to do? But how are you feeling about this from the Warriors perspective?
My feelings have evolved over the last, how long ago did it happen? 18 hours ago, something like that. At first, I think I went with it's a C- or whatever, since I'm very much in the mindset of grading things with letters. Hopefully we'll shake that at some point in the next several hours as we're talking. Just because we understand the risks of taking on Jimmy Butler, and we understand the ickiness of, that extension is a lot that's going to go through his age 37 season. The flexibility you might have had is kind of gone. How much better is Jimmy Butler than Andrew Wiggins, really? And then certainly on a dollar for dollar kind of, standpoint. And then, so had a phone conversation with friend of the pod, Bill, who's in our Discord, and also talked to my brother about it. Really just sought out support, sought out some wisdom. And here's where I've landed. I think because if you made a computer decide what the Warriors should do and there was no emotion involved, they would have blown the team up the day after the 22 title. Traded Steph, traded everybody, whatever. That's the objectively unsentimental correct decision to have made. Didn't happen then, was never going to happen. They're not going to do that. So that extreme is off the table. The other extreme, if you are going to seek upgrades, is to do something like the Kevin Durant trade, which didn't happen, was never going to happen because he didn't want it to. in which you give up all of your future assets that you can trade, right? Both firsts, Kuminga, pods, whatever. Didn't do that. So didn't do that extreme end. And so in search of an upgrade, I think they got maybe the best one that they could have for, realistically speaking, the lowest price they could have paid. So while acknowledging all the risks of Butler's fit and like attitude and cost, I kind of think this is about as well as you could have hoped the Warriors could do if you're going to have them make this kind of trade. So I've come way up from calling it like a below average move. I don't know. It's not a home run. There's massive risk, but it makes them more interesting. I think it makes them better. It raises their ceiling. It might lower their floor a little, but not as much as some other moves might have. So I'm pretty positive on it, even if I don't think it makes them a contender, but I also don't think that move was out there. So really my question is for you, because Dan, if we've had a disagreement at any point over the years, I think it's been related to like what the Warriors should do, how serious they've been. So from my perspective, you have to love this trade. We haven't really talked about it because they did go do something. It was a swing, and really they didn't give up as much as they probably could have in some other, alternate realities. So I'm positive on it. I assume you are at least as positive as I am.
Yeah, I had to grade this one. We're just grading everything. Go check out our grades over at Bleacher Report. Apparently, I gave it a B. I think I agree with everything you said for the most part. The timing is sort of, I'm like, well, why did you wait this long to me? And you could say that the Miami Heat were only going to trade him when it got to this nadir. It's been at the nadir for a while. And it seems like Phoenix was never really in contention of it because Miami didn't want Beal and they couldn't find anyone to take Beal. That's probably the only reason for me to dislike it, because my entire argument against the Warriors standing relatively pat was, what are you actually accomplishing? Because you're pearl clutching these picks. Let's use this year's pick as an example, which they just traded. It was never going to be elite because you were never going to be bad enough. And so you weren't preserving the future in my eyes by saying, oh, we're not going to make this win now trade. Now, if you went and traded all those distant first round picks, yes, but I wanted them to do something that straddled the line in between. And this comes as close as possible. I know giving up Andrew Wiggins is a blow. I really do think that people are kind of underestimating what Jimmy Butler can still do defensively. I think they didn't get rid of GP2. That's someone else who could guard the ball. I think Moses Moody can guard the ball more than we've seen him do it. So I am more worried about, well, what does this fit look like when all the most important players are together? But I also look at it through the lens of the Warriors have been able to do basically nothing during Steph-less minutes since dating back to the KD era or before it. Jimmy Butler is someone, because of his playmaking, because of his on-ball rim pressure, should be able to stabilize those minutes in ways that even a Kevin Durant, like at his peak, just couldn't. And if you believe that you're getting a motivated Jimmy Butler, I think this is a home run swing. And maybe you miss, but okay, like what did you like? If you didn't wanted the Warriors to do nothing, like what was Andrew Wiggins eventually going to become to you? Just someone who was able to like help you float a play-in, but like you were never going to trade him for a bunch of picks. Maybe we got a first rounder on his way out, but it's like you said, because look, if we're being completely objective here, you would have preferred to have moved Draymond Green rather than Andrew Wiggins while doing this deal.
Ooh, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know about that.
Another big,
I think the ceiling play involves keeping Draymond Green. Let's keep our floor higher involves probably moving. I don't know.
Okay.
That's a tough question.
I think that's fair, especially when you look at their center situation. But now you found a way to, I think, straddle both of the lines. And look, the contract is a lot, but it dovetails nicely with when Draymond Green and Steph come off the books.
That's the other thing. It leaves you the option of a really hard reset after all three of those guys come up like that. That might honestly be the plan, right? It's certainly not coincidental that that's how things have lined up. I know you have more to say. I just wonder, is there something that they could have done? The Warriors could have done realistically that would have gotten an A grade from you? Because to me, this feels like, I don't know what they could have done unless you say take Wiggins out of the deal and include other expiring salary somehow and make it like a 6-for-1 trade.
Yeah, with Butler, it would have been tough. Like you could have done something with up to Levine, or if you really wanted Zion, where you didn't need to include Andrew Wiggins. I think just based off where was Miami sending Jimmy Butler if you didn't include that first round pick is where I'm kind of coming from.
I think they're key. Honestly, I think they hold on to him and just ride it
then
out.
You know what? Then you and friend of the podcast, Bill, would have been happy apparently because you didn't want them to do jack shit. But I think you can even argue that it's just because of all the players that they were linked to, like Jimmy Butler I think gives you a higher ceiling, especially immediately than if it was, let's say, a Paul George or maybe even a Zach LaVine. Like Zach LaVine was such a cleaner fit, even though it seems like they were never necessarily in on him. And you also still could have done the thing where, like, well, what was the point of getting Dennis Schroeder after all? Because you were trying to avoid making this move.
Yeah,
so
kind of, right?
You might have wasted time doing that. Like the 3 second-round picks, they gave up a part of that. I think it's a really good trade. I would like it even more if they had done it earlier. And I just have questions about really specifically what the offense will look like when everyone's on the court. But you say this about Wemby, I say it about Steph. Through Steph's gravity, all things are possible.
Yeah, I think as I was working really hard to rationalize it and just try to, this is the other thing is like emotionally, I very quickly pivoted to like, how do I make myself feel good about this for the Warriors?
Well, can I ask a question actually before you go on? This might be why I'm digging them subconsciously. Would you rather have Kuminga or this year's first round pick?
I think I'd rather have Kuminga. And that's while acknowledging they're going to have to pay him now. And you're looking at Steph and Draymond and Butler and Kuminga probably putting you over the apron by themselves. Like it's depending on what Kuminga ends up getting. I think that pick, everybody loves the 25 draft. If unless things go totally sideways, if they go totally sideways, they just keep the pick, which is okay. But
that's also, by the way, that's another good thing about the pick is it's protected through 2027. Right. And so even if you have to wait, like I think it becomes 2 seconds afterwards or maybe even nothing. That's also when these guys come off the books. Like there's just no long-term harm here.
Yeah. I mean, well, the scary downside is that 27 is unprotected, right? So like there's a scenario where you give up. Do I have that right?
I thought it was top 10 protected through 2000.
I think it's top 10 in 25 and 26, and then it's unprotected in 27. I'm pretty sure that's how
might be lower in my grade there then.
Well, I mean, if you don't convey that thing this year, something went wrong. So, but then, yeah, so it's a far-fetched risk, but it's there. And I don't know. Like, I think the fit is a real question because essentially 3 of your 4 core players now, if you include Kuminga with Green, Curry, and Butler, are non-shooters, or at least low enough volume to make spacing like a major issue. And then if you're playing a real center, you're talking about 4 of your 5 guys on the floor that just don't have any gravity. So you're really asking Butler's playmaking and free throw generation to do a lot of the lifting. You're asking Kuminga to not just sustain what he did as like a driver of offense when he was healthy this year, but to pretty significantly increase that and make threes. It's a lot, but I would say Butler and Bam Adebayo did pretty well. And that's 2 core guys that are non-shooters in Miami. So if you add Steph, maybe that does make all things possible. The other thing is I kind of also like this from Miami side, unless you have more on Golden State. Like I think if the alternative is you hold on to Butler and just let him walk and enjoy the space, I'd rather have Andrew Wiggins, obviously, and a 25 first round pick. That's, I don't know, maybe it's going to be from the 15 to 25 range or whatever. That might be as good as you could have realistically hoped to get, given nobody wanted to pay him other than Phoenix. And this was like your only game in town, really.
The only thing I wanted to wrap up on Golden State is, do you like assign any concern to Jimmy Butler saying he initially didn't want to go to Golden State, or is it kind of just the way the Warriors were performative and saying they didn't want to make a win now trade? Is it on that level too?
It's scary to discount it because of the way Butler has made things uncomfortable when he hasn't gotten what he's wanted at other stops in the past. I still think that's probably just something you say because you're really sure Phoenix is going to give you that extension and you're not sure anyone else is. And again, here I am rationalizing. He agreed to opt out and just sign this 2-year deal. So it's really 1 more year at $58 million or whatever it is. So it's like, he kind of gets some of what he wants and hopefully that pacifies him. Honestly, like, I think if you're Butler and you're looking at Golden State and Phoenix, if you care about winning and not just who's extending you, because the Warriors just did it, I don't really think Phoenix is a rosier kind of landing spot than Golden State is.
The Warriors still have stuff if they wanted to go out and make another move, technically.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. The Miami side is cleaner just because they got what they could, and it's decent considering the circumstances.
Yeah, there was, by the way, Golden State not going out and getting a big two felt a little weird, but I guess
Yeah.
just it might make more sense to downsize here to try and increase like the offensive, flexibility with Butler there. For Miami, though, I think it's a solid return for them given how much the situation devolved, and they probably had more leverage than Jimmy Butler in the end when you look at the outcome, just of he went somewhere he claimed he didn't want to and signed the extension anyway. There was clearly a miscalculation done by them, though, because they failed to deduct the luxury tax. It initially looked like they were going to get Kyle Anderson off to Toronto. That fell through. Toronto, we'll see, had other things lined up. So they can do it. They're like inside 3 million. I imagine they'll do it going into the draft. But I don't necessarily love Kyle Anderson's fit, or maybe I should like it more because they're playing Khalil Ware and Bam Adebayo together. So they're going to have all these funky lineups. Getting Davion Mitchell is interesting because you have Tyler Hero and Terry Rozier, but Davion Mitchell does all the things that those guys don't do, which is just like exist under someone's skin defensively. So I feel like this team still has the makings of a potential defensive behemoth. I just don't know what the offense, and like you said, getting Wiggins was good for them, and they got a first round pick. So like that's a bigger deal. I don't know the alternative. I don't think it would have been any better, but do you view them as they owe that pick to OKC this year before it becomes unprotected next year. So they need to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Do you view them as more or less likely to do it after this trade?
I mean, I guess, I guess more, as long as we're saying that the before version of the Heat was everybody that's there, no Jimmy, and none of these new guys. In the totally like farcical situation, Butler comes back and actually plays for them and tries hard and everybody's happy about it. It's probably a wash. So I do think getting Wiggins, who's going to be good for them, I think. And that is really, just to put sentiment back into it. Like, it was really hard. I think you saw some of the Steve Kerr comments after the fact about how it was so difficult to move him and all that. Like, I think that was pretty genuine. I guess they're more likely to answer your question than they were before the trade. It's still not a given though, right? Like, you lose Bam for any stretch of time, or Hero, and you don't have the depth, certainly in like terms of defensive anchors or, offensive engines to really withstand any kind of injury to either of those guys.
I guess you could look at it and say, though, okay, Ingram, the Toronto was already so far out, and who knows if they'll even have Ingram play a bunch this season. But then like Chicago and Atlanta kind of removed themselves from the running. And so you kind of look at it as, you have to if you're going to get in by virtue of the play-in, or even like their top six right now as we record this. So having to fend off the Magic, the Hawks, the Bulls, the Sixers, that's not going to scare you. It's like it's not even just, they might just be a top six team. So they don't even have to get in by way of the play-in. I think this trade, if you weren't going to have Butler, increases that. Really, the only thing I'm uneasy about too is just like, you need to give up a second round pick to get off of PJ Tucker to make up some of the salary difference there. I think you need to give up a 2030 first rounder. And by the way, you were right on the first round pick protections. It's unprotected in 27. So there is I like that even better for the Heat. But then you also have to give up the 2031 second, less favorable of your owner Indiana's, to grease the wheels of like Utah's end of this. I also, like, part of me sort of wondered, but you have Rozier and Hero, like, would Schroeder have made more sense here? But I think just under the circumstances, solid deal for Miami. I did want to talk to you about the Pistons on this one too, since we're not really going to get to them later. I loved this for them. I mean, at first, like, they had the ability if they wanted to, because KJ Martin fit into the room exception. Like, they could have done all of this. So you gave up no like key players. You get 2 additional seconds, and you ended up sending one. You ended up sending a 2028 second to Utah. So you're +1 second round pick. And then you get Dennis Schroeder. How many times did we suggest, like, do they just take him into cap space if the Warriors are looking to duck the tax? By the way, I don't know if you give credit to the Warriors that, like, well, they clearly decided not to duck the tax this season. So, but I love this. Lindy Waters, like, he's an actual guy. We view him as sort of this siren song here as a joke, but he's someone who could be useful if you want another shooter on the floor who can space and move and do a little bit of stuff on the ball. So I just really thought this was, maybe fans had higher expectations for their use of their cap space. But I think Dennis Schroeder, you have to kind of maybe not cancel it all out, but I'm not looking at what he did in Golden State as sort of a harbinger of what's to come, because like you're not running as many pick and rolls there. Like, that's their motion-based offense. And so in Detroit, they run more pick and rolls there. I think especially if he's going to be running units without Cade, I think he will look better in Detroit than he did Golden State.
It would be hard for him to look worse than he did in Golden State. For starters. Like, I just think, yeah, like, wouldn't some part of you, and maybe Pistons fans would feel this way too, been a little disappointed if they had just used that cap space to be like a way station for unwanted salary? And in that hypothetical, maybe you do get these 2 second rounders or something approximating that for that money. But they got a guy they really need at a position that they're real thin at, and a guy that should probably be pretty good for the rest of this year for them. Certainly, is an upgrade on who they were trotting out to run second units since Jaden Ivey got hurt. So like they use the cap space to get the assets that you'd want, and then got a guy that they really need. So yeah, I was very high. It's hard to compare like, the scale of the Butler acquisition to, the Pistons got Schroeder, but it's just a question of like, well, what were each team's goals and resources? And the Pistons like did at least as well as any other team we've talked about so far. And really just considering what was possible, did extremely well. I think just like comparing them to anyone in the league.
Yeah. And also when you look at the trade deadline in totality, you don't look at anything and say, oh, well, why weren't they the team that did that?
Yeah.
Type deal. And so to not have to give up any, like you're again, plus 1 second round pick with at minimum a guy in Dennis Schroeder who when healthy can play a bunch of minutes for you.
Yep.
So I thought they made out well here. This trade's a little bit less complicated to tackle, Mr. Hughes. You want to take us through Brandon Ingram to Toronto?
Yeah. So Brandon Ingram did in fact get traded. So New Orleans sent him, and by the way, the extension information that if you're watching this on the graphic is important because that has been just the hang up for trading Brandon Ingram. He can sign a 3-year, $144 million extension until June 30th. After that, 4 for 20 up to 209, 5 for up to 269. So Toronto onboards that, and who knows, there's got to be an agreement in place as far as what they're going to pay him, and everybody's happy with that, I guess. So in order to move him, New Orleans took back Bruce Brown Jr., who's expiring, Kelly Olynyk, who's got $13.5 million on the books for next year, and Indiana's 2026 first round pick that has top 6 protection through 2027, then becomes a couple seconds, one from Utah in 27, or is that right? Utah 27 and Dallas 28. That's what'll be conveyed if that first isn't conveyed. I mean, what are your initial thoughts on this? We haven't talked about this at all. I'm curious where you are on it.
From Toronto's perspective, because we have a big super blockbuster to cover for New Orleans after this. Just looking at what is Toronto doing? And I don't mean that in a way of I think this is a terrible trade, but you traded OG and Pascal Siakam last year, but then you end up trading a first round pick at last year's deadline still, as well as this one. And effectively now the trade tree for Pascal Siakam is Brandon Ingram, Jacoby Walter, and oh my God, what am I missing from I'm missing an element of that. I'm blanking on it right now. Bizarre.
Well, Brown came and went, so that's part of it. Yeah, I'm trying to now. I can't remember.
But it's just such a bizarre path for them to follow at this moment, and I don't hate it. And just like having another playmaking wing is not a bad thing. I'm just so curious to see what the fit is when you have Emmanuel Quickley, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett. Like Emmanuel Quickley can definitely play off the ball, but he prefers to be on the ball. It's like those are 4 guys that want to be on the ball, none of whom just based off their pay grades, you can't just, and it's certainly not going to be Scotty. You can't just say, okay, go to the bench. And so that creates some complications. And then I do like that they held on to Chris Boucher as part of this, but it's like your primary center is not a spacing center. So you have Brandon Ingram, who prefers to get to mid-range. He did up his 3-point volume this year, but I really think for this to work, like it seems like a good value playing a vacuum, right? For what they gave up. Like there's not a ton of upside to that first round pick that they sent out.
Yeah, I that's a factor. I think just I don't know. It's weird. I think Ingram being attached to this, like, I want a max extension has caused us, and certainly me, because I've never been the biggest Brandon Ingram fan, big news flash, but like the guy was a fairly legit all-star. He's been good for 20 plus. He's been good for 5 assists for half a decade. Like he's a good player. Like he's a clear starting caliber wing in the league that honestly, if he would just do all the stuff we wanted him to do, shoot more threes, we wouldn't have any fit questions. I don't think if he was just like, I don't know, 30% higher volume from 3, I think we're just like kind of done complaining about what he does offensively, or at least less apt to do that. So I like it for Toronto. I take your point and I agree with it that it's just kind of like This is a team that's just not on board with a hard reset. Very obviously, like you can trace that back to we want Quickly and Barrett in the Anunoby deal. We want players, and then they essentially, they pay Quickly. This is a team. Masai Ujiri has had, he had comments shortly after they made those moves last year. It was just like, we'll win here again. Like this was never going to be a hard reset. And I guess if that's your intention, we can debate like the wisdom of it. Then Ingram makes a lot of sense because it's hard to get a guy as good as him for a protected pick, expiring salary, and Kelly Olynyk, who I think is kind of a net negative contract.
Oh yeah, he can't do like whatever you thought he could do on defense. It's like 75% less than it was at this point.
I will say for New Orleans, New Orleans is one of the few places Olynyk makes a little bit more sense because he'll space. And if you have Zion and you're running your offense around him, then okay, that's minor on the check in the positives column for that. But yeah, the price paid here for the talent is pretty low. And now the additional price will just be that next contract. That's kind of the hang up for me.
And by the way, it was Agbaji. So would you rather have Siakam or Agbaji, like Siakam on his current contract, let's say, or Siakam, or Agbaji, Ingram, and Jacoby Walter? I don't know that like this season, the answer is pretty easy.
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to look at it through the total of the deal. And I think I'm curious to see what the fit is going to be. They could still reorient the roster, but this is also not like if he left in free agency, they didn't give up a backbreaking amount, but you did give up a first round pick. So you are somewhat pot committed. Toronto has not historically squeezed its own free agents, but I also look at the market saying, well, Brooklyn's not going to sign him. So where is he going to try and go? And you're almost not that you should squeeze him, but like you should play hardball to the extent of if he wants to leave, it needs to be through you. Like you need to facilitate a sign and trade. So maybe they get assets on his way out, but I'm really fascinated to see how much he gets, because if it's like, if he ends up getting like 30 or 35 million a year, like that will make this trade look a heck of a lot better. I mean, even if he signed the extension he's eligible for right now with Toronto, 3 and 144, it's like so short that I would be sort of okay with it. And just from a talent play, I like it. I just don't know. Like you were right. This was never going to be a hard reset for Toronto because of what they prioritized in OG, and just like Scotty got paid, and it's not, and even now, and this is part of the benefit of getting off Kelly Olynyk, like they have avenues to just re-sign Brandon Ingram and still be under the tax next year. So I don't hate it. I'm just so confused by what's happening here. And I hope we get to see it in practice, because Brandon Ingram hasn't played in over basically 2 months at this point. And I'm just curious, like Toronto though, there's no incentive. Like they're not going to they have no real chance of getting into the play-in from the East, right? They're 5 losses out of it.
Yeah, they got a long way to go.
So they might not play him a ton, if at all. And that makes it even harder to pay him, right?
Right. I will highlight here, because we've talked about 2 big trades here, and we've liked them on both sides for both teams. And I think that's a real, I found myself feeling that way about a lot of trades today and the ones that have already happened. Like I don't know what that means. Maybe teams are getting smarter about just like trading with the right partners, so it's actually possible to have mutually beneficial deals. But I like this for Toronto. Like I don't love it. Don't love it for Toronto. Don't love it for New Orleans. Like it for both.
I would say rather than like it, I don't actively loathe it.
Right.
For either team.
Well, because usually it's like, oh, somebody fleeced somebody else, or it's clear who the winner is. If you're doing like trade winners and losers is harder this year because there's just so many deals that are like, yeah, it makes sense for them, makes sense for them. Their priorities are different, and they kind of both achieved some of that. You know what I mean? Like, I think that'll continue as we go through some of these trades.
Before we should talk a little bit about New Orleans. I did just want to ask you, like, could you see there being, I know they're different players, but like, RJ Barrett was a lot of the times viewed as a ball stopper, even though you could see him get out in transition in New York. But he comes to Toronto and like he's playing with more heads of steam or moving away from the ball more. Do you think that there's even a chance Brandon Ingram is going to benefit from that? Or has it been with RJ? He was in so many different New York ecosystems. You never got that sense. And with Brandon Ingram, it's been kind of, no, they've tried to get him to do this stuff and he's either never did it, or did they just never try it enough with him?
I think there's always a possibility, because I mean, the Lakers, Brandon Ingram was just so early on that it's hard to say like, well, he was this way then. I mean, kind of, but like a change of scenery, I guess is what I'm saying, always has the chance to do that. Ingram's tendencies feel a little more ingrained than Barrett's did, or they like feel like more organic to him as opposed to being like a product of like, what am I supposed to do here?
He also I think he could change, like following his own principles. And so there might just be more of a attachment to the oh, I succeeded. I made an all-star game playing this way. Why would I play differently?
Easier for him to take the stance of like, this works. You can't tell me to change, than it was for Barrett. But I don't know. I think it's possible optimistically that he does do the stuff we've been asking him to do.
So for New Orleans, and just before we dig into just what you think they got, how they did for Brandon Ingram, they also did trade a 2031 second round pick to OKC along with Daniel Tice. That's how they initially ducked the tax. That's an F trade, by the way, because you couldn't figure out how to duck the tax as part of a larger trade with Brandon Ingram here, and you gave up a 2031 second round pick, less favorable of New Orleans and Orlando. CJ McCollum still there. Zion Williamson still there. Their season's been just absolutely torpedoed. What did you make of? It's really the brand. We knew that them ducking the tax was that was the most inevitable thing of the trade deadline, right?
Yeah, and they didn't do it. I guess maybe Tice was. I think we thought Javonte Green would be the one to do it, and that they get something for him.
But you know what? They might just need him to play at this point. They're so
maybe so. Yeah, I was actually most surprised that the Thunder waived Tice after this, because I was ready to start talking about it makes sense, a little front court depth. Like he might give you 8 to 10 minutes.
That's coming back. That's the biggest trade deadline acquisition of all, maybe. So
yeah, I don't know. I think if you want to be critical of New Orleans, you could point to this, and you could point to like the things they didn't do. I've kind of stayed away from that just because I don't know what was out there. Like, can I criticize them for McCollum still being on the roster? Like, yeah, I guess, but like, who's clamoring to give you something worthwhile for him?
I think the bigger issue for me is that, and you can ding them a little, I gave them a C+ on the Ingram deal, which is what I gave Toronto. So it's not like I said, I didn't love it or loathe it necessarily I understood it from either side. But like the Ingram decision, it took too long to get made, and it should have been made well before this. I'm not even talking about this trade. I'm talking about before this past offseason, when everything became sort of muddied. And that's what's so confusing. And now I'm very curious to see, following the DeJounte Murray Achilles injury, which it doesn't just submarine this season, but it really could torpedo next year as well. I'm not saying they needed to move McCollum or needed to move Zion, but they couldn't even get the small victory of you thought they were probably going to get Chris Boucher, the expiring money, and someone who spaces and maybe is definitely going to do more on defense than Olynyk. And no, you have to take on Olynyk's money for next year. So that's fairly uninspiring, but I don't know what, maybe it'll depend on where, are they just going to base it off of where they land in the lottery this year, Grant? I just don't, this return doesn't make me, this more so I look at it and say, they just didn't want to pay Brandon Ingram. They didn't even want to try and squeeze him. And I guess you could read into that and say they might be prepared to really go nuclear over the offseason, but I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I just think zoomed all the way out, getting a first with light protections on it for Ingram, who just was never going to be back. And you might have just you could grit your teeth and risk getting sign and trade value for him. I think I had both of them in the B- range. I think both Toronto and New Orleans. So we're pretty aligned on that one.
Nothing really else for the Pelicans here, but they are. I feel bad for fans of that. The Pelicans fans and their franchise are just absolutely cursed. This is a deal, Grant, that we're going to get to. Mark Williams to the Lakers, where I don't know that I've ever differed on consensus more. But the trade is the Charlotte Hornets get Dalton Knecht, who everyone likes to point out is actually older than Mark Williams, Grant. How cool is that? Cam Reddish, a 2030 first-round swap, and the Lakers' 2031 first-round pick unprotected. The Lakers are getting Mark, he who has played in fewer games than he's missed since entering the league, Williams. What are your thoughts about this trade?
So it's interesting because I graded the Lakers as a whole, and so they're an A+ because of the Luka trade, and they could have done literally anything, 5 terrible trades, and they still would have gotten an A+ because they got Luka. This is a lot for Mark.
There. Spoiler alert.
This is a lot for Mark Williams, right? We can agree on that. For a guy that what's his he's good for, I think it's 16 and 10 or 15 and 9, shooting, great lob threat. His rim protection numbers are terrible this year. Okay. They've been better in the past.
There, since you brought it up, here is where Mark Williams has never ranked. He's ranked above average as a rim protector when it comes to defensive field goal percentage expected at the rim. He's ranked as an above average rim protector once throughout his career. That was his rookie season. And this year, Grant, he's in the 39th percentile.
Could I, if I were a Mark Williams defender, I would counter with, well, every single year of his career has been a small sample size. So because he never plays. So yeah, no, so from the Lakers perspective, I understand the theory which is to say this guy can go up and get a lob. And if you're playing with Luka Doncic, you're going to shoot 78% from the field and you're going to get 5 dunks a game and you'll look good that way. I think to give up, I know they're way out in the future and you just got Luka. So your future first rounders maybe are all devalued now if things go well with him. So okay, maybe, but this is a guy that's like, we don't even know if he's a rotation big guy on a good team because he's never been on a good team. And all we know for sure is like good counting numbers, I guess, and scoring efficiency in an extremely limited role for a bad team. The Luka trade gives you so much cover, but that is so clearly a one-off, isolated, nobody knows what happened there kind of deal that this feels more like a just crazy Lakers reach to me.
Thank you. Because I understand he's very dynamic on offense.
Yeah, he looks great. Like he passes the eye test all the time if you just catch him on the right nights.
And you need him to go in like sort of a straight line, like the way he could move for his size and he's gargantuan. I recognize there's a ton of upside here, but between him being injury prone, the real defensive issues that look, I'll eat my words if he doesn't play in Charlotte anymore bump. I just don't like, are you going to blame the availability on that too? And he's also going to be extension eligible this summer. And you could argue the injuries help repress his value, but he has all sorts of leverage after you gave up this much to get him. And so I recognize you needed a big. I recognize he's an excellent fit next to Luka Doncic on offense. But like, I saw a lot of this rationalizing. Well, if you look at it in sum of they gave up Dalton Connect, this pick, the swap, the other pick, Max Christie and Anthony Davis for Luka, it's a win, right? Yes, it is a win, but you don't like Luka gave you a margin for error and you don't just get to exhaust it. You should be
right. You just use it up
off of it. And I don't think that's what the Lakers did here. I'm interested to see kind of how it pans out. And I do reckon, again, Luka diminishes the value of that 2031 first round pick, but like Mark Williams was I guess it speaks to them trying to make something of this season. Look, quite frankly, I'm surprised that Nico Harrison didn't give them Derek Lively for this trade package, the way things have gone so far. I just don't, maybe it pans out, but I think my biggest concern would be even the best version of Mark Williams and the most durable version of Mark Williams. Do you think, like, what would be the percentage chance that you give him of actively elevating a really good defense ever?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think like it's not high. I'm just trying to think like what would he need to do to justify really 2 firsts? I know it's a swap, but it's so far out that like you really don't know that you're going to be like this. It might, who knows who's benefiting from that. And a number 17 pick and Connect, who I think, what was the stat? He was the highest first rounder to be traded in his rookie year since Buddy Hield.
Yep.
And like, I think shorting Connect is a decent bet. You probably should have done it after he made 1 million threes a couple months ago. Williams has to be really, really, really good and a plus defender to justify this. And and stay healthy. There's like so many ifs that he has to satisfy for this to look like a good deal for the Lakers. The counter is just Luka will make him awesome on offense, but then the counter to the counter is like Luka would make a lesser player look great. He'll make everybody look great. So the defensive side of this is a huge question mark. And the best bet for the Lakers is that Mark Williams, who got eviscerated by the Hornets studio team for just like dogging it in their most recent game, is a different level of defender on a new team. And maybe that happens. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know why you'd be confident that that was going to happen.
I will say this is not me even being an asshole. I'm genuinely saying this. Either the people who loved this trade or the Lakers fans who loved this trade have not watched enough of Mark Williams play, or I have not watched enough of Mark Williams play. And you know what, Grant? Either's a legit possibility because Mark Williams doesn't really play. So we have to talk about the Hornets, a team that I think flew under the radar this deadline because they make another move. So we'll talk about selling on Mark Williams, but also they acquired Yusuf Nurkic and a 26 first round pick from Phoenix, which is just the least favorable of Memphis, Orlando, Phoenix, and Washington. That team's a fucking joke, man. In exchange for Cody Martin, Vasa Micic, and a 2026 second round pick, it's going to be the least favorable of Denver and Golden State. We can talk about the Hornets in some. I love the fact that they've Musa Diabate there, and now Nurkic is just their primary bigs, and Taj Gibson, of course. I like the idea, and I think more teams should do this, of if you don't think that this is the guy and he's still on his rookie contract, sell high on him. And I think they did that. Yes, you can say that Lakers pick is going to be in the 20s and they're never going to use that swap. They got a lottery ticket on Dalton Connect, just someone who we know at least can space with volume and hit them at a reasonable clip on catch and shoot threes. And now you have that. It's not just about what does that 2031 pick become. It's you can dangle that in future trades. And finally, and I think this spills into the Nurkic trade as well. The fact that they just come out of this deadline plus 2 first-round picks, it reinforces what both you and I said at last trade deadline and over the offseason. This franchise is thinking in bigger picture terms. That is not something that was ever done, or at least not done enough during the Michael Jordan, certainly the Mitch Kupchak era when he was running the front office as well. And so I've liked, basically, with the exception of keeping and how they handled the Miles Bridges situation and what they paid him, I've loved a lot of what this franchise has done. And you can argue they've already paid LaMelo and Brandon Miller's done for the year. Tijon Salon doesn't necessarily look like he's going to pan out. So where you kind of still feel stranded, but they're not overreacting to that. They've taken this gradual view, and I appreciate the hell out of it. And I think what makes it easier for me to say that is I think they got, taking on Nurkic that extra year, but like he just becomes an expiring contract next year. You could move all over again. So I think it helps that they probably got good value out of what they did. Then not just the view of it, but like they got good value out of what they moved and what they took in.
They had no business getting out of this deadline with the assets they got out of it with. I think I just echo what you said. And I would add too that, like, while the earlier season injury to LaMelo and then Brandon Miller going down for the year sort of made the decision process, like it made it pretty clear, like at least for this year, like what your goals should be, because it's a lost season, bummer. But I can remember, preseason looking at this roster and, kind of thinking like, I don't know, I would shudder to think where we went on their over-unders, but like there was Miles Bridges, Miller gets better, LaMelo's healthy, Mark Williams and Nick Richards, couple good, like you could talk yourself into, speaking as like if you were management, we might be all right. Like we might not be in a position where we're taking on bad money to get first and think about what's happening in 26 and 2031 and whatever. Like, I think it's just refreshing because this management group understands the assignment, and it's not necessarily the easiest call when you already have LaMelo on his, rookie scale deal, on his big deal now. And you also got Brandon Miller and you like him. The temptation to chase like short-term gratification was one that previous management succumbed to all the time and would have been justifiable here, I think, in some, if you spun it a certain way. So really, really good deadline by the Hornets. I think everybody should be encouraged by sort of like what the thought process has been for them.
What do you make of the Suns here? And just as a quick recap for them, they get Cody Martin, who we love, although we really wanted to see him on a contender, and now he won't be. Micic and that 2026 second-round pick. I had trouble because this is what I want to ask you. I think you can say, it only took 1 first-round pick to get off Nurkic. Like he wasn't playing. He's on the books for $19+ million next year. Now have a kind of a pathway to ducking the second apron because Cody Martin is a non-guaranteed salary. Micic is the team option for next year. But I have trouble separating it from they traded their 2031 pick to open up the pick that they just traded, and they had nothing more meaningful lined up than this deal.
Phoenix's side of this deadline is really hard to evaluate because I think we both agree that they're kind of they've been going after the wrong thing for, basically since ownership changed. At the same time, like they are trying to get better and they're using every like shred of asset they have to do it. And I think Cody Martin hypothetically helps them. I think getting off of Nurkic makes sense. I think there's a way you could say that the Suns like improved themselves at the deadline and that's their only goal. And so they like, good for them, but it's just wrapped into the bigger package of like, just everything they're doing is stupid and short-sighted. And like you have Ramona Shelburne talking about things are toxic there now. And it's just like you can see the cliff coming and they sped up towards it. And so like, I don't really know how to evaluate their deadline. Are you of the opinion that just like, do you even agree that like, okay, if you put your Phoenix Suns like glasses on, they did well because they got a little better and they added Martin who might help, or is it just like the big picture is just you guys are ruining it?
I'm worried to see how much they actually play Martin because I'm wondering if sort of his iffy 3-point shooting. But I think when you look at their individual moves for the most part, The Nick Richards deal, of course, that was fine.
Yep.
This deal, I think that was fine. But this one specifically is inextricably linked to them giving up their 2031 first round pick, which if you're telling me they did that and they had an idea that they weren't going to get Jimmy Butler, or they knew they weren't going to get him, and they also kind of knew that they were going to, like, the Kevin Durant trade talks apparently started 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So that's not even, you use the word short-sighted, which it is. It's also kind of stupid then that you traded your 2031 first round pick with all this uncertainty in the air, because why did you need to make that move then, unless you thought you were about to cross the Jimmy Butler finish line?
Yeah. Which you should have known too. Like, it's so bizarre to me that they didn't just go to Bradley Beal a month ago or before that and say, are you going to waive your no trade clause? Because it eventually developed like it's a no, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And then they should have operated with that understanding. And then the follow-up question is, hey, Kevin Durant, like, do you want to be traded? And if so, where? And if he says no and nowhere, then you can't go do that pick split up thing. Like, it feels like there was a more rational course of action they could have taken if they'd just gotten like concrete answers on some core questions, because now this all feels disjointed. So as we're talking, I'm getting more negative about what they did, even if I think like you separate all the moves out individually, it's like, okay, those are all sort of justifiable. It's just the position you've gotten yourself into is just objectively bad.
They're careening off the edge to nowhere. And I guess my final question to you would be, if this was a situation where Kevin Durant told you he's not going to sign an extension unless you go out and get Jimmy Butler. We now know they didn't get Jimmy Butler, so forget about that. But if that's the ultimatum he gave you, why are you then not trading Kevin Durant?
Right, because what you're saying is like this story is going to end one way, and it's going to be you trading Kevin Durant from a position of very little leverage.
Which, by the way, is how this ends this offseason, right?
Maybe so. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the happy ending is to this. And it's amazing how fast, like, think about this team has been together for like a year. Like, I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's just like this thing has gone completely sideways real quickly. And it's because of just like a series of decisions that have, kind of culminated now in a deadline that, okay, all Booker, Durant, and Beal are all still here. We've like shuffled the deck chairs, but otherwise, we're out some more firsts.
I'd like to ask you a bonus question too, because the most pushback I've seen in comments or when I've like skeeted about this, why is giving up, knowing what they did, your 2031 first rounder, that's 5-6 drafts away, whatever it is, 6 drafts away. Why is that a bad deal when you got 3 more imminent first rounders back?
Well, one, because it's evidence of like a half-formed plan that you didn't execute, which was we're going to use those for Butler. And 2, the upside on those future firsts is low. And that 2031 is just more valuable because of how high of a pick it could be. Right? Like that. I mean, so I will say I dumped on the verbiage of like they unlocked their other picks in the draft, which what they did, they moved that 26 first, which they couldn't have if they hadn't split that 2031 into the 25, 27, 29s. So I'll take that back. Yeah, that was something that they enabled themselves to do. But like, is there another answer to why that was a bad move, or like did we hit both of them? Because you didn't use it for Butler and you just gave up the highest upside asset.
And you also, what you just did is just gave up more of your future for when this inevitably goes to shit without making the move. Like that was the whole reason you would break up these picks. And the bigger thing is not one of those picks. I know you mentioned that Kevin Pelton said the average value of those 3 picks together would be like what, 6th overall or something,
which I wasn't persuaded by, but yeah, that's what he gamed out.
And it's just one that's like, okay, do you trust this? Like, I know they drafted Ryan Dunn, but like, are you trusting them to hit on every single one of these picks? There's no pick with a high upside. You gave up your highest upside asset for a bunch of low upside assets that you then use to dump salary and get one rotation player, if that. So that's why it's bad. Speaking of not bad, because we're going to start here with the Cleveland Cavaliers, Grant, but do you want to go through the DeAndre Hunter trade for us?
Yeah. So the Cavs get DeAndre Hunter. That's all. They gave up Karis LeVert on an expiring deal. George Niang got $8.2 million next year, a 2026 first round swap and a 2028 first round swap. So those would be they've already swapped those with Utah in the Mitchell trade. So it's basically the least favorable of Cleveland pick, Utah's pick, and Washington's pick on the 26th, and then Cleveland and Utah's on the 28th. In addition, they gave up 3 seconds, 27, 29, and 31. This to me, tell me what you think. Is there a move made by an Eastern Conference team that figures to have a bigger impact on like who wins the championship this year than this one?
I think you could make the case that no other move is going to have a bigger impact, because what other contender made a trade?
That's the thing. You just like, I don't know what we're digging for. Like, I guess Jimmy Butler. Like, there's just,
or is it Anthony Davis in Dallas? If you ask Nico,
yeah, right. Or how good do you think Luka's going to make the Lakers? This is a fascinating trade. So, which side do you want to talk about first? Do you have strong feelings about is Hunter worth this?
I have incredibly strong feelings about Atlanta, but we have to cover another trade from them. So let's start with Cleveland. To get someone who might just be a part of your closing unit while not giving up a first round pick and while ducking the tax this year, which now probably emboldens you to say, hey, we had Karis LeVert coming off the books. We could have re-signed Ty Jerome and kind of still toe-stepped it beneath the tax next year. But no, you've kind of blown past that. I respect the hell out of it. I recognize DeAndre Hunter. I don't even think his defensive reputation is inflated. I think people just look at him. He's 6'8", 7'2" wingspan and say, oh, that dude's 3-and-D. I don't think he always checks the D box. He can be pretty good in individual situations. However, he has cleaned up his offensive play style a lot. The shot profile is better and his true shooting percentages climb, but he can also still do a little bit off the dribble. The bigger thing to me is this is a classic example of what it's like in a different situation. His defense in Atlanta is maybe bleh, but your defense in Cleveland, when you have Isaac Okoro to chase around smalls and then Evan Mobley and or Jared Allen behind you at all times, is ideal. So that was their weak point, really, insofar as they had one. And I think the final thing before I throw it to you, it's easier to get him to just slide up to the 4 as part of one big unit and feel good about it in the playoffs than saying, we're going to play George Niang or we're going to move Max Strus up or even Dean Wade or, heaven forbid, like Isaac Okoro in that instance. So I think I loved there's some risk here. You gave up the swaps. I don't care about. Those are already like whatever. The second round picks, okay, but like this is your best chance to win a title ever without LeBron, and you're seizing it. And I respect the hell out of it. And I think it just helps that there was reporting that said Atlanta would have killed to get this package at the beginning of the year. DeAndre Hunter is substantially more valuable now a few months later, and I think. You could question, will he be able to play the same role on a better team where the volume might be lower? I really do think the type of offense that he's played this season, certainly coming off the bench, of course, it will scale to a more minute role.
Yeah, I think I do agree. You got to acknowledge it's possible that the previous 5 years of Hunter's career are more indicative of his true talent than the half season he's played so far. At the same time, he has made changes, and I think the changes he's made, specifically with respect to like he's a good catch and shoot 3-point shooter now. Like that's you're not going to be asked to do a whole lot more on this Cleveland team that already is one of the best offenses we've ever seen. So I think like I don't know that he's the exact answer to the type of play, the exact player we've been just begging the Cavs to try to find, which is just give me a pure 3 that's going to make open threes and guard the other team's best player. He's not really that, but I do think, as you said, his ability to play the 4 just it just unlocks a lot of good options, and he will be a better, option against 3 and 4 size guys than LeVert, who was playing really good defense and was shooting it better than Hunter so far. He's over 40%.
Ty Jerome is cut into his, I know LeVert just came back, I think, but like Ty Jerome is cut into his playing time.
That's the other thing is you do like LeVert really is more of a 2 that can handle the ball as a 1, which you don't need on this team at all. Cause Garland, Mitchell, Jerome, like there's plenty of that. So you could think LeVert is the better player. Like, and you wouldn't be crazy, but not on this team, I don't think. And so Hunter, I think provides a ton of value. And yeah, I don't care about least favorable swaps. Like big deal. Like you've already given those up. So 3 seconds. And the other thing is LeVert was going to hit free agency. You might've had to just let him walk. That's another thing. So that, Niang, I don't really see a realistic scenario where Niang is playing major postseason minutes for you. So that's another kind of zero loss aspect of this trade. You're more expensive, I guess, because you're going to have to fill that other roster spot, and Hunter's on the books and he's more expensive than LeVert, but he might not have cost more than LeVert was going to cost. So it's kind of a win across the board for the Cavs. And that's even if you get, I don't know, 80% of what Hunter's been this year, I still think it's just, you do this every time.
Right. And you might just wonder, okay, well, what is he going to look like in the playoffs? It's so different because Cleveland is so much more talented, can insulate him at both ends of the floor.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you, though, because they were linked to this player. I think we maybe it's not a good question anymore because we know what it took to get Hunter, but if it cost the same, which it wouldn't have, you would have been out your 2031 pick. Do you prefer him or Cam Johnson for this team?
I think honestly, it's close enough that if all things being equal, I would rather have Johnson, but I don't think you are getting Johnson for this package. So I guess I prefer Johnson if I could get it for the Hunter package, which was just not going to happen.
Yeah. So but I even think like if you just would have told me not even what they got, I said this to someone asked us on YouTube and I responded, I think I lean Hunter. It was close, but I think he's better on defense. Do you have anything else to add for the Cavs before we get into the rest of Atlanta's business before we talk about them?
No, I think we should move to Atlanta because I can feel some strong feelings coming from you, and I'm not sure I totally share all of them.
So one of the other trades they made is that they sent Cody Zeller to Houston to duck the tax along with a 28 second round pick. It was Houston's own. That helped them get out of the tax because the other deal that they made did not necessarily do that on their own, even though I think they ended up trimming payroll as part of it. But the Atlanta Hawks wound up trading Bogdanovic to the Los Angeles Clippers. And in return, they received Bones Highland and Terrence Mann. But also as part of that trade, Atlanta sent out 3 second round picks to the Clippers, Minnesota's 2025 second, Memphis's 2026 second, which is protected 43-60. So you only get it if it falls in the top 42. And then they sent out the Clippers 2027 second round pick. I understand this deal since you're waiting for the strong thoughts from me. I understand this deal based off how Bogdanovic has played this year. He has not been healthy. He has not been good. So I think you can look at this and say that's like a C, maybe a solid C plus. Like Terrence Mann comes in, not going to give you necessarily a ton of consistent offense. Will defend his butt off. You have him, Reese Shea, Dyson Daniels. You can do some pretty funky stuff there defensively now. But you gave up 3 second round picks. And I think the bigger thing for me is they don't own their own pick this year. And yet they seem determined to surround Trae Young with as little spacing as possible on the offensive end now. And you could say, well, isn't it admirable to kind of zig or at least run your team without regard for a bad mistake that was already made? Sure, there is. But then I would circle back to the DeAndre Hunter deal and say, if that was because I've come around to the idea for the most part, unless you're the Bulls, basically, and maybe even the Kings, I don't think they looked at better deals and said, you know what? No, we're going to take this Cleveland one. However, if that was the best offer for DeAndre Hunter available, I would have simply just kept DeAndre Hunter because this is a move that was more financially driven over the longer term for them. You go tell me what they're going to do with that additional flexibility this year. That's not really going to be true cap space probably. And even if it is, what are you going to do with it? So I think this was just a bunch of, not even for the sake of making moves. I think this was just a really bad deadline overall for Atlanta. They probably could have made the Bogdanovic trade on its own and then ducked the tax with Zeller, and I would have been fine.
Yeah.
But I just think this team just kind of reinforced itself as the pinnacle of mediocrity.
It does feel a little bit that way. I didn't love Atlanta's deadline by any stretch. I kind of understand it. And they're in a tough spot because like you said, they don't control 25, 26, 27 first rounders. Those belong to the Spurs. And so like, look, that's a situation of their own making. So no sympathy here, but I think just given those constraints and given the quality of this team, which is diminished by Jalen Johnson going down for the year, like this isn't a team you should pay the tax on. So I get prioritizing ducking the tax and like, I also sort of get, even though we just kind of talked down the swaps in 26 and 28, like that's still, you could still point to that and say like, well, it's a little bit of first round, equity, I guess. I think LeVert actually helps them because Bogdanovic had not been good, because they need because Kobe Buffkin's hurt, because you need someone else who can dribble and pass. LeVert can do some of that. And you get a look at him and maybe you bring him back. Maybe you're just happy with the savings. It's probably the latter given Atlanta's general MO. It's not a good deadline. The other thing you can say in favor of Atlanta is that they probably traded Hunter at the peak of his value. Now, maybe they should have gotten more for him if he's at the peak of his value. It's kind of just a blah move for me, or a deadline for me, but I'll acknowledge it's disappointing that it's just like, yeah, they just wanted to duck the tax, and we're probably willing to take kind of suboptimal packages to do that.
Do you feel any differently, and I would say more positively or more negatively, one way or the other, about their deadline following the report from Chris Haynes? I think it was on NBA TV afterwards, and said stuff between Trae Young and the organization is weird now.
Did he say that after in like 2021 and 2022? And it feels like that's the annual Trae Young report.
Well, I think now the clock starts to tick because Trae Young has, after this season, just a year. Like, we could talk extensions for Trae Young. That's always sort of the timetable, but independent of that, it's, he has one more year left on his deal, $46 million, and then he has a player option for $49 million after that. So he is scheduled for free agency in 2026.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, if you want to get back on level ground as far as your picks are concerned, moving Young makes sense. You might get 3 first back for all. Who
you're not getting your own anymore. That's for
no,
sure.
You're definitely not. Who knows? I mean, yeah, that is low key a huge bummer for the Hawks that the Spurs did get a point guard that they won't have any interest in Young. Yeah, I mean, that's inevitable. I think if you start piecing together like stars most likely to move going forward, Young has to be pretty high on that list, and I have had him there for a long time. Yeah, that I don't know how much that changes my opinion, because it's just kind of like, yeah, it's priced in. But I guess Young does give you kind of like Booker, I guess, does in Phoenix. Like, there's a ripcord to pull, I guess, which will make your landing a little softer, but it's a problem that you're like thinking of things in those terms.
Yeah, I just don't. Do you look at any of these deals? I mean, the Cody Zeller one is, they ducked the tax and it only cost them a distant first round pick. That was Houston's, but second round pick, excuse me. Like, you don't look at either of these two deals and say they won it. I guess you could say Bogdanovic in event, but you had to send out 3 second-round picks.
Yeah.
To get off. He only had 1 guaranteed year left on his deal. And Terrence Mann, I know he's younger, but like, he's like a dead even money relative to what Bogdanovic was making.
Yeah.
Next year, I think he's slightly cheaper. I just don't even look at that as, you couldn't come out of this deal and say like, oh, like this clearly made a boatload of sense. And I guess to your point about LeVert being valuable to them, did they acquire him with the intention to, because you could say, oh, Bogdanovic was expendable because of the way LeVert's been shooting it, better defender, and at least better passer too. So like the better player right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you trust that? Like, is the plan to pay Karis LeVert? And if it is, that's wildly uninspiring.
No, I think you've got to justify it if you think these were good moves by Atlanta, you've got to be convinced that Bogdanovic is washed, and you don't want to be on the hook for 2 more years after this one with him. And then you've also got to have like a pretty serious intention to keep LeVert. Even then, it's kind of like, well, this was all still pretty clearly just financially motivated, and that's hard to get inspired by.
That, or I guess if I had to undermine my own take, they have more information on DeAndre Hunter, who's had a checkered health bill in the past. They might just have no faith in DeAndre Hunter continuing to play at a 6th man of the year level moving forward.
Which, not a crazy stance to have.
The Clippers side of this, and this is in tandem. I did talk about this myself. Like, they ducked the tax of that initial PJ Tucker trade. I will say, I saw some stuff going around that I don't know if it was Clippers fans or just general media people or blog people, podcasters saying, well, why didn't they just make the move for like Davion Mitchell and duck the tax that way? And I found that interesting. I think Eubanks has a chance of actually filling a need more than Dave. Like, you have Chris Dunn on this team. You have just all these like defensive, like perimeter, awesome, like guys who are awesome at doing that. So I didn't have an issue with that, but they make that move, duck the tax, and then go out and make this move, Grant. I also think, by the way, the Davion Mitchell stuff, maybe Bogdan doesn't get a buyout from Washington because he wants to keep his bird rights and see if he can get more money that way. They have the ability to just sign Brogdon on the buyout market because they're no longer like into one of the aprons. So what did you think about them going after Bogdanovic and what they gave up to get him specifically?
Well, it's just nice that they finally traded Terrence Mann, who they just held out of every deal for as long as he's been there.
Untouchable in James Harden talks to getting traded for Bogdanovic.
I mean, look, Dan, this is another example of a deal that's like, yeah, I see it from both sides, because it's just a bet that Bogdanovic can be the guy that finished like 5th and 6th man of the year last year and like 6th or something 2 years before, like that he can just be that guy. And if he is, then man, he helps you so much more than Bones or Terrence Mann does, right? Because it's like another guy that can space and can make plays and is just a smart offensive guard. Like, it's an upside play, I guess, and taking on some risk as the Clippers. But if Bogdanovic is what he's been, and even if we're just talking about this year, I don't know. It makes a little bit of sense to me, and you're getting picks with them. So I don't know. I think the Clippers, like, if you just look at what went out, Tucker, Bamba, Mann, Highland, a second, and you got back Eubanks, Mills, Bogdanovic, and more seconds, like, that's a net gain to me. If Bogdanovic can't play, then all that analysis changes. But let's see,
So yeah, I think it would change, but I think the two things that I would stand out of why I loved this deal specifically for them, I think that your ceiling this season, if you kept Terrence Mann, it would have been lower than if you swing on Bogdanovic and he hits.
No question.
The other thing too that I don't think is being talked about enough, there's a team that clearly has like aspirations to do something by or in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
They did sign Terrence Mann to that extension, so that's on them. But Bogdanovic comes off the book. He has a team option for 26, 27. So like he comes off the books then too. So like I think now aligned your books a little bit better around. We'll see what happens with James Harden this year and his player option. Does he sign a longer term pact? But you very clearly, I think, like you've kept that sort of path towards, like you'll be able to do something in 2026, or at least have a ton of flexibility leading in there. And just, you mentioned at the top of this, like Terrence Mann, even if you don't want to say he was expendable relative to this package, he was like kind of a surplus relative to because what they needed is exactly what Bogdanovic has done at his peak. And so if they also end up with Malcolm Brogdon at the end of this too, that's enough safeguards for me to love it. But I think I liked their trade deadline overall.
I did too.
Our next team, that Marcus Smart trade, Grant, we'll go through it and begin with, I think, the Grizzlies, of course. But the overall trade was, here we go. Memphis gets Marvin Bagley III and Johnny Davis. Sacramento receives Jake LaRavia. Washington receives Colby Jones, Alex Len, Marcus Smart, Memphis' 2025 first-round pick, and Sacramento's 2028 second-round pick. As we're recording this, the initial reporting, which had players going to teams that they didn't end up with, did say that Memphis was getting 2 second-round picks. I haven't seen which second-round picks those are. Memphis gets off. Well, you have to note this. It's a cliche, but it's a fact too. They sent out Tyus Jones and 2 first-round picks to get Marcus Smart. And then they had to send out a first-round pick to get off of Marcus Smart. What do you make of this order of operations for Memphis?
I mean, that I know I can tell you're saying, we shouldn't consider what it costs to get him because that's paid already. But like, that is the first paragraph of this trade, is that Marcus Smart cost you 2 to get and cost you 1 to get rid of. And like, that's just a massive, massive loss. Right. And I think LaRavia actually kind of indirectly cost a first to get initially, because there was a draft day trade for something about that. I don't know. Don't quote me on that one. But a lot of people were talking about how Memphis just like seems to draft okay, but then not so hot with the trades. And if you're a Memphis fan being told that, hey, we freed up some money so we can give Jaren Jackson Jr. his next deal, like, that's disappointing, because you're a contender in the West and you paid a first-round pick to get off of a guy that, while he's been terrible and been hurt, has a lot bigger chance of helping you win this year than Marvin Bagley or Johnny Davis. And that's kind of where the analysis should stop, I think, if you're Memphis. So it's bad for the Grizzlies. I just think objectively bad. It's a salary dump, basically, that you're paying a high price to execute. And a team in Memphis's position shouldn't be doing that. Like, that's just not, that doesn't square with how good Memphis is. And I hate it. I mean, like, I don't know. Do you feel differently?
I mostly hate it. So my whole thing is, if you can carve out space to give a renegotiate and extend to Jaren Jackson Jr., I think that has value, because he's not extending off that current number, which I think is like, what, 23 million?
Yeah.
And 140% of that. So keeping him out of, even if you think that he'll just come back, keeping him out of unrestricted free agency has real value.
Sure.
Here's my counter to that, though. He's going to make all NBA, and he will be Supermax eligible if he does. So you didn't need to make this trade to keep Jaren Jackson Jr. If you're saying you're not going to give him the Supermax, even if he's eligible, that's a different kind of conversation. Is he going to still sign? Then, now that you've made that, like, there is one outcome then where this is okay, and that is you keep Jaren Jackson Jr. out of 26 free agency. And if you don't, this becomes a demonstrative failure. But I think that's the only level of justification for it, because even if you throw out what they gave up in the first place, it's like you said. By the way, Jake LaRavia, they're so deep that he can kind of be buried. But like he's played well for them.
He's a good player.
But they also declined his team option, so they could only give him like 5 point whatever million. I don't really think that would be an issue next year, but something to note. So throw out the cost of what they did for Marcus Smart. You were right when you hit it on the head and said you can't afford like this type, especially when you're working within such tight financial constructs overall of, well, we're trying to plan around paying Jaren Jackson Jr. along with Bane and John Morant, especially in this new salary cap era. I would say the most charitable way to put it is that it's somewhat logical, but it's just mostly uninspiring. And if Jaren Jackson Jr. wasn't going to make an all NBA team, I might not be as hard on them because unless he gets injured.
Yeah, he should make it.
The game's threshold played at this point. I'm not trying to put that out into the universe. Like you didn't need to do this to pay Jaren Jackson Jr.
Do you think there's any chance Smart could have been a helpful player for Memphis, like in the playoffs potentially?
If he's healthy, offensively, no, I think he's done.
Yeah.
Whatever that means for Marcus Smart's offense.
Mm-hmm.
I think defensively, sure, because we had this conversation leading into the deadline of Jalen Wells has been fantastic. They have all this like big man depth in the world. And now Gigi Jackson's back. But like when you've dealt with injuries to him and Vince Williams and Jalen Wells is a rookie, and we know Desmond Bane's and John Morant's defensive limitations, like who is just the guy that's going to go guard the most experienced other perimeter players? Scottie Pippen Jr. is really small. Like the answer was still probably Marcus Smart, which is problematic for obvious reasons, but you haven't created a solution to that.
That's the thing. I think the analysis would be really different if someone that came back to Memphis in this deal, you could talk yourself into giving them 5 to 10 minutes in a playoff game. Like, because I really do think that is the lens that Memphis should be viewing things through, is like, we might make the Western Conference Finals. Like that's a possibility for this team. And to get back Bagley and Davis, who just like are on the way out of the league. Like I think full stop. Like Bagley had no business getting this deal that's finally $12.5 million expiring. But like, if you thought Smart might be able to give you anything, I just don't think you can justify this deal, because you can deal with the Jackson stuff, and you can, and look, you've drafted well too. Like a late 25 first rounder might return the guy that's you just drafted Jalen Wells at 39.
Desmond Bain, look where they found him. Jalen Wells wasn't even in the first round.
That's what I'm saying, 39th pick. And so like, go get another Jalen Wells. Like it doesn't make sense to me, because even the thing that we like about Memphis is its ability to draft, and it just kicked that out the window. Like to get rid of Marcus Smart, who might have helped you, who would have been more helpful to you than Bagley or Davis. So I don't get it.
Now, if they use this additional flexibility to like if that's how Jaren Jackson Jr. stays in Memphis, because maybe it then ends up being a cheaper deal than what we thought the Supermax was going to be. But like at that point, it's okay. So if it's going to be less than the 30% max, I mean, maybe he would sign for. I'm just trying to
do it in the offseason.
Like, what's that?
Trade Smart in the offseason then. Like don't do it now.
I think that's the rebuke, because I was going to say if they use this flexibility to renegotiate and extend Jaren Jackson Jr., will that change your like impressions at all? Like it's not done by way of him making the All NBA team and getting some version of a max deal.
I guess it makes it easier to justify, but I don't know why you couldn't have. I don't think Smart's likely to help them. I just think it's more probable than the guys they got back, but I don't know why you can't wait. It's not like you have to negotiate Jackson's deal the day the season ends and we're going to trade. I don't know. I'm sure there's some justification other than just, this is a dumb, stupidly timed move that is like antithetical to a team that should be trying to win. But I don't see it.
Let's talk Kings. They have another deal to go through after this one very quickly. But so they sent out here Colby Jones, Alex Lynn, and that 2028 second, and they're getting Jake LaRavia back. They also made a deal to get Jonas Valanciunas, which is, we know now why they didn't take back Trey Jones in the Zach LaVine deal. So they take him into their non-taxpayer mid-level exception, and they give up 2 second-round picks is what it ends up being for him. What have you made of? And we've already talked at length about De'Aaron Fox, Zach LaVine, but we're talking about them in macro. But is there anything you like about these deals specifically? What do you end up thinking about their entire deadline direction, et cetera?
I think it's hard to come up with a positional group that's been less productive than backup big on the Kings in the whole league. And so Valanciunas is far from a superstar. I don't think he's a starter on a good team, but like he can give them so much more than they've been getting from Len and Trey Lyles and just good guys they've trotted out to try to fill that spot. Also like cornering the market on Lithuanian big guys. That's awesome.
You think they'll play together?
Oh God, no way. How would that work?
I mean, I wouldn't. I would try it. I'm not gonna lie.
You know what? If that means Sabonis starts taking like 7 or 8 threes, I'm for it. That would be
Jonas Valanciunas just screening and rolling for Sabonis. Let's roll with it.
Let's see. I mean, this is a no-brainer acquisition for them given the price, right? I think the Kings should do this 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, I'm with you. I graded them favorably in the Memphis Washington deal as well. I like Jake LaRavia. I think their fans, and rightfully so, were pining for a bigger, more impact wing defender type. I don't know if I trust Jake LaRavia's 3-point stroke, especially in a playoff setting, but he's shooting 45.5% on almost 2 catch and shoot 3-point attempts per game. And when you watch him, he's a legitimate 4-position defender. Mm-hmm. That is not someone aside from Keegan Murray that they have on this roster. So between him, Devin Carter, Keon Ellis, I think because you've essentially decided we're going to try and recreate like a better offensive version of that Bulls team, but with worse perimeter defenders around them. So I think this was like the way to go with it. I really think the Jake LaRavia edition is probably one of the more underrated acquisitions of the deadline.
I agree. And as you noted, when we were talking to Memphis, because his 4th-year option was declined, the Kings can pay him no more than like $5.2 million starting in free agency, which might I don't know. I don't know if he's a mid-level guy. That might be enough to keep him around. But if you're just talking about this season, like I think LaRavia is going to play and like will give them, as you said, a lot that they're not getting from other wings.
I should give like the Doug Christie, Eric Kings the benefit of the doubt, but after watching Keon Ellis be buried on the bench for so long, I just won't,
a little scary.
Glom onto LaRavia playing. But I think I'm still not crazy about what they did with De'Aaron Fox. I think that was short-sighted. They should have skewed towards starting over, or at least addressing the situation way earlier than they did. But I like these 2 subsequent moves have made me feel better. And also the thing is, I like Zach LaVine. We both kind of tilted toward the direction of people are too low on Zach LaVine. And so I'm interested to see what this team can become. And I think they're more like, they're deeper now, and I think they're a little bit more versatile on the defensive end than they were a few hours ago.
I would put it this way, just to close it up on the Kings. Like when I did the full deadline grade for them, it incorporated the LaVine Fox deal. And I would say that I feel like I think it was a C+ overall. And the Valanciunas and LaRavia acquisitions moved the grade up. I think those were just sort of, pound for pound better deals that made more sense to me than the LaVine acquisition.
Do you know what's frustrating about them? I'm not talking about these players specifically necessarily, but these are also the types of deals that the Kings could have made like at the previous 2 trade deadlines.
Well, that's true.
We need to talk some Wizards here, but let's get to one of the other deals that they were involved in. They got a boatload of second-round picks they traded a boatload of second-round picks to the Philadelphia 76ers to end up getting a first-round pick. And so it's a less favorable first-round pick, but I found like just sort of the context of it interesting. So if you're watching on screen, perhaps you could read it, but they end up sending Philly Jared Butler, a 2027 second-round pick, a Golden State's 2028 second-round pick, a 2030 second-round pick that's most favorable of Phoenix and Portland, on top of their own 2030 second-round pick. They take back Reggie Jackson, and they got a 2026 first-round pick. It'll be the less favorable of Houston, the Clippers, and Oklahoma City. So there's like a real chance that pick is going to be worse than number 25. They had so many second-rounders, I don't care. And then I think when you look at the rest of their trade deadline, where you get another first coming out of that Marcus Smart deal, and I was torn on the Kyle Kuzma trade because I think it's clear people have said that they could have gotten 2 first-round picks from it last year's trade deadline. I don't know if that's true. I'm pretty confident that they could have gotten at least 1 at the trade deadline and over the offseason. So they clearly waited on him for too long. When you kind of look at the return they got, and now you have Marcus Smart and Chris Middleton as just sort of your vets with Malcolm Brogdon around these youngsters, I almost love it. And so I like their trade deadline way more than I thought I was going to, with the caveat that it clearly would have made more sense to deal Kyle Kuzma last February, or at least over the offseason.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think maybe the lesson too that I needed to learn from the Phoenix deal we talked about earlier is that kind of getting any first has additional value because, not that this is an issue for Washington, but it does allow you to trade first, in the years before and after that. You kind of conduct the step-in if you're piling up extra first. Again, not a Washington issue because they got plenty. But yeah, I'll give up 4 seconds for a low first just because, you're right. It's going to be in the 20s. It might be number 29 or 30 or whatever, but that still just has additional value because you can do other stuff with your own first or other first you get. Flexibility there. Again, this is another Charlotte-esque situation where it's like, all right, this is what you're supposed to do in this situation. Take on some bad money, nothing too long with Middleton. That's what I'm referring to, and smart, nothing like not crazy with first attached. Like that's the order of business for first order of business for a team like this. And like I don't know what to do with because we keep coming back to this, like, how much do we knock them for not trading Kuzma or whoever we happen to be talking about like earlier? I think it's not like you can never do that because there are situations where it's super obvious they should have traded, like Vucevic a couple of years or whatever, like Levine before his value cratered, like all that stuff. But yeah, I think I liked Washington's deadline quite a bit. I think to get out of it with 2 firsts, like, who knows what, maybe Kuzma will be his Lakers self with the Bucks, but he wasn't going to be with Washington. So it's kind of like, what's the difference? Yeah, I'm mostly positive on them. I think, by
the way, just signing Jonas Valanciunas and then just turning him into 2 second-round picks.
Mission accomplished. That was a beginning, middle, and end, like fully executed plan. Like they got what they thought they'd get for him, I bet.
And the other thing too is you didn't see this because Kuzma was on the books with Middleton. Although you did kind of like Middleton, if he picks up his player option, he becomes expiring. But like with the Marcus Smart thing, you rolled expiring contracts into another salary slot with Marcus Smart that you could then do something similar with next season. I don't. The only critique I could levy is that you probably could have gotten more for Kuzma a year ago, 6 months ago, but you might have made up just as much, if not more, of the overarching value with all of your moves done at this trade deadline. From Philly's perspective on this trade, where you're giving away that first round pick for 4 seconds. But I also, since we're going to talk about the Sixers here, there wasn't an addendum to the Caleb Martin trade where because he has a hip injury.
Yes.
And Dallas was initially okay with it, but the physical came back. So now Philly has to send out a 2030 second round pick while getting back Quentin Grimes and its own 2025 second round pick. When you're looking at everything they did, we already talked about the KJ, like we at least noted the KJ Martin stuff, that trade with Washington, where they're at in the standings and what this might portend. How do you feel about what they did and where they're going?
I feel slightly in the negative. Let's split it up. So I think Grimes, if we're talking about the Caleb Martin deal in particular, I think Grimes is a better player, probably. The question of what's going to cost to keep him in restricted free agency kind of complicates that analysis, I think, because you say what you want about Martin and the injury and production to this point, but 3 years left for $29 million. Like I don't think you're getting Grimes back for much less than that. You're probably going to have to pay more than that for Grimes. But to get your own second back in that deal, I like. Now, basically him failing a physical more or less and having to send the 2030 out makes that a little bit worse. I think the thing that it bothers me more, I don't know, do you want to jump to the KJ Martin side of things or just talk about this deal specifically?
I just want to talk about the Sixers in some, because I think it's just I liked this deal specifically was fine. I think that Quentin Grimes is a little smaller and Caleb Martin can guard up and Quentin Grimes can't. And so I don't know how it all works with Jared McCain and Tyrese Maxey and Quentin Grimes moving forward, but like you could start if you want to Quentin Grimes and Tyrese Maxey with Jared McCain coming off the bench. They also needed guys who could hit wide open threes, and Caleb Martin wasn't that dude this year. I've had some people text me and say that people around the league are just waiting for Quentin Grimes' legs to implode. I guess that's a risk, but like you knew that Caleb Martin was banged up to the point that Dallas had the right to veto the deal.
Yeah, could have gotten out of this and didn't.
So I like this trade for them more than Dallas, even with the second round pick going out. The other stuff, I don't know how to reconcile it because you signed KJ Martin.
That's where I'm going.
Inflated contracts. You could be buyers at the deadline. And what you instead ended up doing is getting rid of 2 second round picks to duck the luxury tax, which is that's ownership cheaping out. Let's call it what it is. And you could say, well, given where they're at this season, it doesn't make sense to check that off the box. that's fine. Them reacting to this situation is of their own creation. And so I don't love and also because you can't tank at this point. Like we went through the merits of it. We did that whole like mini episode bonus clip on it. I guess I'm conflicted. I understand it, but I don't support it, except I like the other two deals, even getting some more second rounders in the door when you just had to throw two of them out to wash off of KJ Martin. And that 2026 first. Yeah. Now I think the biggest downside there is now you can't trade a 2026 first round pick. Like the benefit of having two was it opened up all these other possibilities. So I understand two of these moves. And then I even understand the KJ Martin trade, but I'm not going to celebrate a team that is still playing Joel Embiid. I get like he came back, had a triple double.
36 minutes in that game, Dan.
Yeah. So I don't know what this, so I asked you how you feel about what the Sixers did and where they're going. I have no idea where they're going. And I think that's why I have to default to, I don't love this trade deadline for them.
I like, again, yeah, I'm mildly negative. You said what I was going to say about the KJ Martin side of it. Is like that turned quickly to where you're paying to get off that now. I mean, I don't think the Sixers know where they're going because they can't, because Joel Embiid's health is maybe like you're still just tied to him and no one can be sure how much he's going to play or how long he'll stay healthy, and all the same, it's the same story really. I guess like trading KJ Martin and paying seconds to do it was kind of, again, you alluded to this, kind of like the right decision given the circumstances. But then you got to get past the like, well, ownership should just pay the tax. You don't want to be the repeater if you don't have to. It's just disappointing, I guess, more than anything. Cause like, that's the exact opposite of what that deal was meant to do when they signed him to it.
Yeah. And it would just be like, you thought he would have played, I guess not played well enough for you to just trade him away, but that still took 2 seconds to get off him.
Yeah.
I guess I don't have strong feelings other than, if you thought Philly's situation was perilous before, like this trade deadline didn't like assuage any concerns at all.
No.
I wanted to ask you about this because they did do something else, but this was a big trade I didn't get a chance to talk to you about. I won't go through the details. You could look it up on screen if you want, but the Bucks trading Chris Middleton and AJ Johnson and a first round pick swap to get back Kyle Kuzma, basically. They also they send away Patrick Baldwin Jr. to the Spurs, and then they made the trade of Marjon Beauchamp for Kevin Porter Jr. What do you just make of everything that Milwaukee? I did notice that it seems like Bucks fans are, and when you trade away a franchise, just like the emotional component of trading away Chris Middleton is huge. I don't know. I try to talk myself through it where I kind of understand the theory of Kyle Kuzma, but part of my concern, among my many concerns, was there's a big downgrade here in playmaking, ball handling, and getting Kevin Porter Jr. does not make me feel better about that.
No, well, I mean, you're forgetting they also got Jericho Sims for DeLon Wright.
Look, Jericho Sims, you want stone hands. He's your guy.
He's your guy. I mean, the defense falls apart when Brook Lopez doesn't play. Maybe Sims can add some energy. I don't know. Like,
is Brook Lopez now expendable this offseason? Because
Jericho Sims is in, man. It's time to turn the page. I guess my very first thought was the Bucks must be really sure that Middleton's just never going to be a guy that can give them heavy minutes consistently. Because Kuzma, to me, is a pretty significant downgrade. He's really had like one passable 3-point shooting year and has been in the low 30s, basically all otherwise. I think you could counter with like, can we judge anybody who's been on Washington for the last several years? Like maybe he's closer to Lakers Kuzma, which is good defender, role player, like that kind of thing. So much cheaper with the declining structure of that deal. Like which is to say, I get it from the Bucks perspective. If you're sure that Middleton just can't be the guy that he used to be, not a crazy hypothesis given just the injury issues and what he's done so far. Like per minute, he's a better player than Kuzma. Just how many minutes are you getting? And for the price. So like, I understand it from that point. Just disappointing that like AJ Johnson, we hardly knew ye. Like he just was in the G League. It was a risk. Nobody liked that pick to begin with. And now you punted on a first. You giving up a 28 swap, like
after his career night too, right? Didn't he have like a huge game on the 5th and you move him on the 6th or whatever, the 4th and then the 5th, whatever?
I'm not sure I even knew AJ Johnson had like played more than 5 minutes in an NBA game this year. which is bad because I've been grading rookies all season and like tracking their G League stuff.
Well, your latest grades wouldn't have accounted for the performance happened like 2 or 3 days ago.
So. Okay, that's why I didn't know. So I guess this is another one where it's like it's just eye of the beholder stuff. If you told me that Middleton was going to be able to play, then you don't do this. But I think the Bucks are in a position to know. You know what I mean?
I view it as the Bucks have effectively punted on contending for a title this season is where I've come around to. I understand
even if Middleton just wasn't going to be reliable, like from a night to night, big minutes standpoint.
Chris Middleton in modest minutes is more valuable in a playoff series than Kyle Kuzma because of the chemistry with Giannis. Who's better at getting the ball to Giannis than Chris Middleton?
Sure. Yeah. I guess it's just like you need more than 15 or 20 minutes every other game of that.
Okay, but how good does Kyle Kuzma need to be in his 30 minutes, 35 minutes? Because it's probably a defensive upgrade. We've seen Kuzma defend. People wrote off like when he was first in Washington, like that's kind of where a lot of the defensive reputation stuff felt like it was changing for him. Mm-hmm. There's probably a defensive upgrade here. This is an offensive downgrade. And so unless Chris Middleton's ankles are actually cooked, but I looked at it as they wanted to figure out how to, one, get out of the second apron without giving up their 2031 first or second round picks. And they also wanted to plan around next season when they might be able to avoid like aprons or even the luxury tax altogether, depending on what happens with Portis. Connaughton have player options. Brook Lopez is a free agent. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you look at this team after this trade, even if it's the way that Chris Middleton has been used and played, by the way, this season. Like he's had some incredible offensive like moments and performances. How are they better equipped to win a title?
I would just, I don't know. It's a coin flip, I suppose. It's just, you get X from Middleton and you get 2X from Kuzma, and is that production more worthwhile overall? I don't know. You're really, I think if you said, tell me what you think about this. Middleton probably couldn't give you more than he was giving you going forward this season, right? Like in terms of minutes, in terms of availability, whatever. I think it's fair to say Kuzma can probably give you more than he was giving Washington. I guess the question is just like, is that enough? Like, and your answer, I guess, is that a little bit of Middleton is still more valuable than more of Kuzma, which is a fair position to take. I think it's a close trade, but I understand wanting to get younger, more athletic, get heavier minutes, get more two-way, dynamism from Kuzma. That's an iffy bet because he might just be Washington Kuzma, and then in that case you're cooked because that guy's not a good player.
Or even if he's not, like, okay, like he's a better cutter than we could see, and so he could be a better driver. But if like as you mentioned, his 3-point shooting has never been awesome.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they would need out of that spot. I think also maybe I'm prisoner of the moment in the sense that when I first reacted to this trade, I said part of the logic was, okay, sliding Kuzma up to the 4, and then you play Giannis and Kuzma instead of Giannis and Portis in those non-Brook Lopez minutes. And now Portis becomes more expendable. So of course they're going to go do something. They can aggregate salaries. And yet they end up with, after this trade, Jericho Sims and Kevin Porter Jr. So I think that maybe I'm giving them too heavy of a demerit just because we're reacting to it like so close from that. But that was part of my Middleton Kuzma calculus. And it felt like I was grasping at straws there. And the fact that they let go of them entirely is why I'm inclined to think this wasn't about this year. It felt like it was more about bookkeeping for the future. And Giannis apparently approved of the Kuzma acquisition. I'm curious to know if he knew that Middleton was going out as part of it. Not his job to understand the salary cap.
They just told him the first part. They just said who they might get. And he's like, cool, do it.
And he's like, oh, Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton gone. Kyle Kuzma in, done. So I don't love it. I think you can still, to your point, though, justify it.
It's right down the middle. Because I think, like, last thing, there's a real, based on past precedent, there's a pretty decent chance that the Bucks would have got exactly 0 from Middleton in the playoffs. And Kuzma, just the health record says you might get something. That's maybe that argument. I think that makes your argument still right, because the Middleton, I guess, ceiling is higher because maybe he could play a lot, and like therefore their title odds should be better this year. I don't know. This is a tough trade. I get it from both sides, honestly.
So let's get into some of the teams. They did things like Utah Jazz fans. Rest assured, we will get to them. But let's start talking about teams that either did smaller things, didn't do as big as we thought, didn't do anything. We'll begin with the Brooklyn Nets, Grant. I think the notable thing here is not that they didn't do something else. It's that Cam Johnson is still on the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, maybe even some people would say, wow, Cam Thomas is still on the Brooklyn Nets ahead of restricted free agency. What did you sort of make of that decision? And sort of they did their business early and then sat out the deadline?
Yeah, of the teams that were inactive, and there were only a handful, I think Brooklyn's the one I sort of get the most, or I think it's the most excusable one, because they actually did make a couple pre-deadline trades and piled up some seconds for Schroeder and Finney Smith. And I think, I don't know, we talked about this a little bit leading up. It's like, if the package for Cam isn't there that you like, there's no reason to just jump at the best offer now, because he's going to retain some value. You've got your 25 and 26 first. You have control of those now, so you can, next year it's going to be kind of more of the same for you. Maybe you get your 2 firsts or a good first and something else over the offseason or at the next deadline or whatever. The risk is that Johnson falls off because he's playing great, but I think it's the most excusable to me that they didn't do anything. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I didn't. Like you said, they got their business out of the way early. I will say they still kind of just have these games where it's like, oh, they beat the Rockets, like, so where you kind of, they could shut down players. They didn't need to move them. So I'm with you on that front for Brooklyn. Next team, Chicago. They got rid of Zach LaVine. They signed Lonzo Ball to an extension, which he was still trade eligible afterwards. 2 years, $20 million, but they kept him, kept Vooch, kept Kobe White, kept Ayo Dosunmu. And then did you see the AK quote coming out afterwards?
Just sort of like, we're going to basically saying like, we're going to take a look at this and figure it out over time. It's going to be an evaluation process, more or less, right?
He said, I know fans want a specific plan, and we are charting that path right now. We are not done yet. We are in a transitional phase. This will take some time to unfold. It was, we have the concepts of a plan.
Yeah. How would you describe the last several years as distinct from what you just said? Not so
right.
different.
So, I mean, Modest Buzelis is having some moments, so there's that for them. But do you think they did enough to like kind of, okay, at least they're thinking big picture here with that Zach LaVine trade, or should they've made an effort to do more?
So would you agree that the getting their own first back, which had top 10 protection from the Spurs, seemed like the type of precursor to let's tank hard? Maybe? Because the thing is, if they tanked hard, they were going to get that pick anyway, right?
I viewed it as we can compete for the play-in and still get that pick if we somehow come out of the play-in.
That's the problem. That's the problem, is that like, it's the same thing. Why is Vooch still here? Why is Kobe White still here? I don't know. I don't have anything new to say about the Bulls, because the LaVine trade made me think maybe that like they were gonna do what we've been asking them to do, and they didn't. And so now I don't know. I don't know how you feel good about this if you're a Bulls fan, especially like why are so many of these guys still here? I don't get it.
And just that Zach LaVine trade quickly, the real value might have been, well, if you thought the pick wasn't going to convey this year, you were worried about the top 8 protection in the subsequent 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that's protection where it's no, like you can and should be bad enough that pick never conveys. And while it encumbers you with trades that you can make, guess what? The Bulls should not be trading their own first round pick anyway in the first place.
Under any circumstances.
Next up here, the Dallas Mavericks, I just want to know if you had any additional thoughts now that the trade dust is settled. They get Caleb Martin, they trade Quentin Grimes. Are you surprised at all that Derek Lively's still on the team because they don't like paying guys like before they're already paid? I don't understand what the philosophy is in Dallas, but I'm thoroughly confused.
It's still an F- for me, Dan. I don't know it's like the reverse of the Lakers. They were keeping an A+ no matter what. It's an F- for Dallas.
Here's to PJ Washington playing some 3, right? I didn't even go. I thought they might get like another ball handler. They didn't do that. So still disappointing. Just want to see if you had anything to add there. On to a team that did absolutely nothing. The Denver Nuggets.
I mean, so they couldn't trade Murray. They couldn't trade Gordon. They shouldn't, but they also couldn't because of the extensions. There must not have been anything for MPJ, and nobody wanted Zeke Naji. It's kind of like you just go down the list and it's like,
apparently either he's still just in Denver. That's weird.
Dario Saric. I guess like I'm mildly negative because it's disappointing because they're, they should be trying to add, but you just have to acknowledge like they didn't have a good way to do that. I don't think so. I don't feel that negative about it, but I can understand if Nuggets fans are disappointed. I just don't know what you realistically would have wanted them to do.
Well, Grace from What's in a Game NBA podcast tweeted out the main selling point to the fans, not to ownership, of letting KCP walk was, quote, flexibility. And that was always a farce. But now that is obvious because they did nothing in the trade deadline. What was the point of this flexibility for you to sit here and then do nothing when it came to improving the team?
I mean, the truth is you didn't get any flexibility, like one. So you should have just kept him
because you were contracts, Grant. It's all good.
Yeah. This is another one where it's just the precursor move. It was part of the mistake, but like, yeah, you should just have KCP on this team since you weren't going to do anything anyway. Fair point. I think that's right.
That Peyton Watson injury too, right? Maybe
that hurts. Yeah, maybe.
I didn't expect them to do anything. I'm not super mad about it, but I thought it was good by Grace to reinforce that the front office and ownership are usually spinning and lying a lot of the same. Next team up, the Houston Rockets facilitated a bunch of stuff to get seconds back. They took on Cody Zeller, Jaden Springer. So they got picks. That was nice, but Fred VanVleet, listen, is week to week. Not even whenever that's like John Morant territory. He's the one who gets injured. He's week to week. Mm-hmm. So the fact that VanVleet is week to week has me concerned. Were you okay with them doing nothing? Do you think they should have been a little bit more aggressive to get either another ball handler or some shooting in there?
I think they effectively robbed us of any expectation that they were going to do anything by telling us over and over again that they were not going to do anything. So I went into the deadline with that sort of baseline. So I think they waived Springer because they needed the roster spot to take on Zeller and get another second. I was kind of excited. Who needs, athletic young defenders less than the Rockets do? But Springer, let's go. I like Jaden Springer. I think that's like an end of bench. That's a fun acquisition. And they waived him because they needed the roster spot. So F minus, triple F minus, because I knew you were psychotic.
I just was not coming into this expecting you to trust. I was kind of excited about Jaden Springer in Houston. Now I'm disappointed.
I think kind of excited is exactly how one should feel about Jaden Springer, just at all times. I'm sorry you disagree. No, they didn't do anything. Like, they got a couple seconds for kind of just taking on players that teams needed to offload to duck the tax. So fine if you're not going to do anything crazy.
I'm with you. I don't think they needed to do anything. If they could have gotten a shooter where it was like, oh, do you trade Jayshawn Tate, stack him onto another expiring contract? It doesn't seem, based off who was traded, it doesn't seem like there was really anybody like that out there. And it's a delicate balance between acknowledging that NBA windows are so fleeting now versus you also don't, because they're so fleeting, you don't want to pounce and try and accelerate your position at the wrong time. They're top 3 in the West. We've seen some pullback in light of the injuries that they've been dealing with. They'll presumably get healthier. I'm okay with them having done nothing. They're going to have Devin Booker by this time next year, probably anyway. So
easy.
The Indiana Pacers, they traded James Wiseman, so they get an F, right, Grant? But
he's still going to become David Robinson, Dan. I believe it. Yeah, no, just so Toronto says, I think I couldn't get the exact details. I don't even know the year, but the top 55 protection on the second rounder coming from Toronto, those are always my favorite picks that get conveyed. Why not top 59?
I think there has to be like a minimum, right? Or you can't, because otherwise that's like super fake.
It's okay. So those
I would incentivize teams for this and be like, we'll make it top 54 protected. Not even.
I feel like here's what you should do. You should protect it in 59 of the 60 possible spots, except nobody knows what the one unprotected spot is. So it could be 1, could be 25, could be 12. Could be 58.
What do they call that? Just like
it's like the dice roll
box.
It's the roulette protection, where it's just you spin the wheel and you don't know where the protection falls. I think we should institute that.
The Chicago Bulls would totally make a trade like that and view it as incoming value if that was
to live on the edge a little bit.
Yeah. I wasn't surprised they didn't do anything. You might have liked to have seen them gone a little bit more aggressively after some wing upgrades, but the name they were linked to the most never made any sense for that. Like, Cam Johnson's a good fit.
Yeah.
I don't think he's necessarily what they needed. And they're just in a weird spot because you couldn't trade a first earlier than 2028. And what's going on with Jarris Walker and Bennedict Mathurin? How highly do you value them?
Yeah.
They may have been, and they have Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith is back. They may have been an interesting DeAndre Hunter team when you kind of look back at the cost that unfolded, but they didn't have, the Hawks didn't save money as part of that deal. I was going to say, they didn't have the wiggle room beneath the tax to save Atlanta money, but Neither did Cleveland. The Hawks were actually in the tax for a second at the end of that trade. So
I enjoyed Miles Turner tweeting the Survivor logo just with the sweating emoji.
Didn't you find people continuously mentioning him weird? Because this was the first time he was in the trade rumor mill without there being like any sort of veritable backing to it. Well, it was just because he was going to be a free agent. There were all these trades where they didn't even get a center back. And it was just like, all right, so Siakam is your 5. And I did not understand. This was not the deadline for him to tweet that, because I think that this is probably the least, like maybe the second most least likely deadline he's ever been to be traded.
But there have been a lot, which I think is the point. Yeah. He's just like, that guy's got to hate when February rolls around. When he flips the calendar, he just starts to sweat.
Well, did you see Keith Smith tweeted this from, I have to get the pronunciation right, Spotrac?
I think it's Spotrac, but I want to call it Spotrac.
Okay, well, Keith Smith tweeted once that he was in an NBA locker room, and it was around the trade deadline, and a player said, with a huge following, said, "Hey, watch this," and tweeted something cryptic, and then the entire team was like laughing at all the absurd responses and inferences that came in. That's fucking cool. Like, I like the idea of Miles Turner being with his patients, like, yo, guys, watch me do this. We're going to see how everyone reacts to it. I love it.
Yeah.
A team that we're going to talk about next is the Minnesota Timberwolves, who did nothing. But, Grant, did you see that Chris Haynes reported they tried to get in on the Kevin Durant sweepstakes?
You love to see that they tried reports coming out. It's, what close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. So
I also think was part of that attempt like rewriting the rules of the collective bargaining agreement, because they don't have anyone. They can only do 1-for-1. They can only trade. They can't aggregate salaries. Nobody on this team makes as much as Kevin Durant.
So does trying constitute them calling the Suns and then Suns saying, like, even we know you're not allowed to do this, and then the call's over?
Or is it, how far into the second apron are they? So they would have had a cut, like, aren't they like 16 million or something into the second apron? And so you would have need to cut how much salary is part of a Kevin Durant trade.
Can I say, I'm just glad that they didn't make another like clearly financially motivated cost cutting move that hurt the product on the floor, because the Cat trade just was that. And I was concerned that like, we're just going to see more. It also means like, nobody wanted Randall, because I hope they tried to trade. I mean, him getting hurt at like right before the deadline didn't help, but like they must have tried to move him, and it's just there's no market at all.
Yeah, I'm assuming they did try to move him. I just don't to what end at that point. That would have been, looking at the Karl Anthony Towns trade tree after that move would have been fascinating.
You just see like just black in the ledger, and that's I think all that Minnesota cares about at this point.
They still have the potential to do something stupid though, like on the draft.
Always. Yeah.
So, like, to try and cut into that tax bill. So it's not over yet, Wolves fans. It'll be fascinating to see where they go from here. Next up, Grant, please give me your thoughts on your New York Knicks, who made a big trade.
Yeah.
Jericho Sims for DeLon Wright, which, can I actually say one thing? I saw people, James Edwards of The Athletic pointed this out, saying people were trying to like look at the reasoning of it, where, okay, maybe Tom Thibodeau trusts DeLon Wright more than Jericho Sims, but you have Jalen Brunson, Deuce McBride campaign. DeLon Wright really shouldn't be seeing the floor unless you view him as a reserve wing. James Edwards said the Knicks like to trade their guys that they're not playing in the hopes that maybe they could find a home or get paid elsewhere. And so I fave that line.
That's nice. Yeah, I guess I'd just say that I guess Mitchell Robinson is going to help, and or nobody was willing to give up anything helpful for him. So that because he was the guy that I just kept coming back to as like, well, that's the only way for the Knicks to do anything, and he's still here. So there you go.
I think the fact that we've seen them play out of necessity a lot of time, but like Huck Porty and Towns together shows that, okay, they're going to give the Robinson Towns stuff a shot. But then the problem there is you cut into Huck Porty's minutes, and that's your primary building block moving forward. Absolutely. So I don't really know what to do with that. Yeah. I do think this was probably the right decision, because Mitchell Robinson's value has never been lower. And the best way for him to become useful to you is to come back healthy and see like, oh, it works with him in Towns and we're better for it. We're not going to move him, or comes back, plays well. You have the opportunity to make an upgrade, and his trade value is higher in the offseason.
Yeah. He's more valuable to them than anybody else. So you just don't trade that type of guy.
I really hope this next on-screen slide is to your liking for the Oklahoma City Thunder, who, look, they made some moves. They got it. Like, the big move was trading the Phoenix 2029 second for Denver's 2030 second. That's like course altering shit here.
I just like, why? I see you have it up here. It's just cool. Well, they already had 6 in 2029, so they wanted to like trim that number and take a 2030. Like I don't understand any other reasoning for
because you can't. The reasoning is what you just said, plus you can't yet trade for 2032 second round picks. But rest assured, once you can, the Thunder will probably go out and get them.
Yep, that's about right.
Do you feel that they should have tried to do something, whether it was we ad nauseum here? Oh, do they need kind of another ball handling scorer type, or even just a higher volume shooter, maybe with some size, perhaps Cam Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, it's you see Cleveland do something. So the argument that, well, if you're running away with the conference, you don't need to do anything kind of falls apart, because the Thunder could have and had more assets certainly than the Cavs did. I think the fact that Chet Holmgren, the report came out today, is he's ready to go now. I think that mitigates a little bit of it. So
that was on purpose. This was always the time. It was like, oh, look, our trade deadline acquisition is a healthy Chet Holmgren.
I was gonna say that, but I thought it was too cynical, and then you said it, so it must be appropriately cynical.
A team that I don't think could have or should get a pass for doing nothing, though, is the Orlando Magic.
Nope.
How you feel about them?
I checked again, still on pace to have the lowest 3-point percentage by any team in at least a decade. So like, what's the argument for their inaction? Is it just that we're 8th in the East, the injuries derailed our season, so that's why we're not going to go get shooting and playmaking? Like, I guess, but like, how long are you going to wait? We've talked about how they've banked on organic growth and kind of been right, and they've been pretty conservative. The KCP acquisition turns out not to have mattered a whole lot, but that was kind of the exception in terms of them just like generally not doing anything. Why is Anthony Simons still a Blazer? Like that, that kind of thing. Like I think the Magic had a clear need, didn't address it, and then that feels like a concession, because that just means I don't care how good your defense is, you're not doing anything if you can't make a 3 in 2025. So like to have just decided that that's not an issue they're going to address is disappointing to me. They got plenty of time. They can do it in the offseason. Just, do something.
Yeah, I did say I was going to eviscerate them if they did nothing at the trade deadline. I just don't. I expected it, and I don't understand it, that I don't know what else I could say other than it's not malpractice, but it's beyond wildly disappointing. And the only thing I could add to trying to figure out their rationale is like Paolo hasn't necessarily looked great since coming back, and even Franz Wagner has not necessarily looked amazing since coming back. And so they just feel like between that, the injuries in general that they're still dealing with, do they just feel like it's not the year? I think that's inexcusable personally, because I don't think you needed to go, we need to trade 8 first-round picks and get LaMelo Ball or someone. But like, we didn't even hear them linked to anybody.
Right. Yeah, there was no chatter at all. That's crazy. I didn't even think about that part.
Did you even hear their name, aside from idiots like us speculating, when De'Aaron Fox became available? Did you even see them mentioned concretely anywhere?
No, that's what I mean. Like, and that's hard to do, given how much slop is like ladled out to us over the last month or so. To not see Orlando come up at all they really must not have been doing anything.
Our next team that did absolutely nothing, that kind of surprised me, but maybe it shouldn't have, because they're going to win the championship. The Portland Trailblazers, winners
of 9 out of their last 10, Dan. They should have been buyers. That's our criticism. Why weren't they buying at the deadline?
Can Scoot Henderson win Rookie of the Year this year?
Okay, should it matter that they've won 9 out of 10? Like, I get it if you probably can't trade Jeremy Grant for anything of value.
Well, not after, sorry, but like, look at what DeAndre Hunter or Kyle Kuzma went for. What is Jeremy Grant?
Yeah. So that I get. Robert Williams III, plenty of teams should have wanted that guy. Like, and if you want to think even like, more really long term, Toumani Camara would have got you something good, like pick wise, or like and then in between that is Simons somewhere. Like I'm really surprised that they didn't trade anybody, but maybe they're persuaded by this run that they've been on. I don't know.
I think if they're persuaded by it, they should have went out and they should have made a buy. Like, let's put some first round picks on the table and see who we could get in Portland. Was Kevin Durant? Did he want to come there at
Did
all?
they call? We had reports that they called on him.
Yeah, I mean, like, play with a team that might actually be going somewhere. So I'm more receptive to them doing nothing, not just because of how well they've been playing, but I see the value in, okay, Tamani Kamara's better on a good team, but maybe the Blazers are a little bit closer than we think. There was also, I think it was done by Kevin Pelton. I saw mentioned that January tends to be like when the least trustworthy basketball is played.
Oh,
so how much value can we assign to what they've done? I think when I'm having trouble squaring, I am shocked they didn't do anything. And I think, yeah, Robert Williams, Duop Reith, just still being on this team with the number of squads that needed bigs. I look at it this way. I saw a lot of people say, well, why is Anthony Simon still on this team? They need his shooting and just the idea of his shooting still on this roster. And there are, if you're saying they needed to move him to continue to open up minutes for Scoot, I actually disagree. There's a way to get Scoot 30 plus minutes per game. Like other teams do it. Like you can have a 3-guard rotation with your primary floor general getting 30 plus minutes. I think the guy to move, or not the guy, but you either needed to move a big, so maybe you downsize more often, or you need to get rid of like a wing type, forward type player. We knew it wasn't going to be Avdia. That brings you back to Grant. And I would say, look, Scoot Henderson looks amazing. And even just Shaedon Sharpe, the self-creation, the getting to the bat, like he's looked really good. And I don't know how much I buy of their recent stretch. Donovan Clayton's been good basically when he's on the floor all year. The Blazers, we called them, what do we call them? Sneaky deep ahead of the season. We were right. I'm at the point where I'm just wondering, why didn't you just eat like crow on the Jeremy Grant stuff to get rid of the obligation to play him? And I think that would have opened up minutes for a whole bunch of people that don't necessarily need to play the wing spot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, they're 1-9 out of 10. I've said it several times, and they're 3.5 back of the 10th seeded Suns, but ahead of them, also not in the play-in yet, are the Spurs and Warriors who made upgrades. So it's like, are you really like
so your metrics have them winning 9 of their last 10? That's what you have them at?
It's a 90% win rate, Dan.
Okay. That's 90%. How funny would it be? They get into the play-in, they win it, and then their pick conveys to Chicago.
The Bulls just outsmarted us all.
Yeah, I was surprised they did nothing, and I don't think they're not. Are they the most disappointing team to do nothing? Because this is the last of the next team did stuff that we're going to talk about.
No, I think it's just Orlando, right? I'm thinking because Denver, we kind of gave them a pass or a little. I'm trying to think. Denver, Orlando, Minnesota wasn't going to do anything. Brooklyn, yeah, I think it's Orlando, but the Blazers are close second to me.
Our final team, and not a lot of Spurs talk here. Were you surprised? I'll actually ask you this. Were you surprised at all that the Spurs didn't do anything else, like of real material worth?
Well, what was there to do? I guess you could make no, I guess not really. I don't think so. I think this was their move, and then they're going to evaluate this, and they're going to treat it like the Rockets. Like, so let's see what we got with this, and then kind of decide later.
I wonder if you asked them if they knew they were going to make the De'Aaron Fox trade while sending out Zach Collins, if Dominic Barlow would still be on this team, because then I'd be campaigning for him to play every minute that Wembanyama's not on the court. But the Jazz did a bunch of stuff, and I think the best way to frame it, because we could talk about they didn't make any of sort of these huge moves, and I think that was kind of, by the way, to me, I at least took that as I saw it coming when they didn't take back Schroeder as part of that 6-team trade. It was, okay, Clarkson and Sexton aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
But I think Andy Larson summed it up best, saying they got KJ Martin, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Josh Richardson, Mo Bamba, and they subtracted Drew Eubanks and Patty Mills. So they added about $3.75 million in prorated salary for the rest of this season, and they ended up a net plus of 5 second-round picks.
Yeah. And, I mean, this is before the deadline, but getting the Suns 2031 for those three, like,
correct,
whatever first in 25, 27, 29. Yeah, just, again, another rebuilder. I guess it's a little different for the Jazz because they did have several guys that we and everybody else talked about them potentially moving. So they're kind of in the Portland boat in that sense, except they really did go out and get stuff with, at pretty minimal cost.
I liked what they did. And I don't think with Sexton and even Collins, it was, if there's not a bowl you over offer, why do it? I think you could say, was there a deal where you could have given up Jordan Clarkson for seconds? He seems to like it in Utah. And I don't know. I mean, what happened where you look at it and say, okay, the Clippers went up after Bogdanovic, but they might have preferred Bogdanovic over Clarkson, even with the season that Bogdanovic is having.
I think I would too, honestly. But yeah, it's a little like Brooklyn too, where it's like, what's the rush? Because Utah is going real slow with this.
So yeah, I thought they had probably one of the more underrated deadlines. And when you frame it as, okay, $3.8 million for 5 additional second round picks, I fave it. So,
Yep.
And by the way, do you think if he's healthy, like I could see KJ Martin specifically playing for this team?
I was, because he's kind of been, I don't know, not off the radar, but like he put up like 12-5 for the Rockets like 2 years ago, and has had years where he's made threes, like, and he's still really young. Like absolutely, there's a chance he could be a piece that you're interested in keeping around.
So, yeah, I have no complaints here. Whereas like if it was the Blazers and you thought you could identify players where it was, well, why wouldn't you have just moved this guy for whatever? I don't really think that player existed on the Jazz or exists on the Jazz. Grant, everybody's favorite time, although this might be our first inaugural of it, trade deadline superlatives. I think just most impressive, least impressive. We didn't make picks for this because you asked to do this just now.
Yeah.
2 hours.
And I didn't know what I was going to say either. So let's just go with, let's eliminate the Lakers and Dallas, because that just makes it less fun. From
well, by the way, sorry, but the Lakers acquiring Luka Doncic and then still kind of making a case to not have the best trade deadline is
right.
Impressive.
Hard to do, but they still had the best trade deadline.
Yeah.
And the Mavs getting Anthony Davis and still having the worst trade deadline, hard to do.
Don't you hate that part of it though? Because I like Anthony Davis
he's a great player,
and we've had to reduce him to or he's being reduced to less than that because of the context under which he arrived in Dallas.
Yep. Yeah. It's got, I mean, the trade has nothing. You can make the case, and people have, that Anthony Davis was the best player they realistically could have gotten for Luka. It's just not about that. It's about like what else did not come with him. All right. So who had the best trade deadline? And this doesn't need to be who got the best player. It's just like from what their options were, what they gave up, what they got. Maybe we can just throw out some contenders for this and we can narrow it down. I think, like, honestly, Charlotte and Cleveland, because I'm looking at the C's in the alphabet, are the first two that come to mind. Like, I have those guys in the A range, both of them, for very different reasons.
What about this breaking news? Boston just signed Torrey Craig, which they really probably wouldn't have done if they didn't trade Jaden Springer. So I think it's Boston's probably the answer for me.
No, they gave up Jaden Springer, so they did a terrible job.
You were pretty disappointed about that.
Well, I really was.
So my pick, when you first mentioned it, I think it's Cleveland, just as a contender that did something, didn't settle, the value they got back, and addressing their sort of biggest need, or at least trying to. I still can't get over the fact that, like, they didn't have to give up like even the 2031 swap or something. So you can even make a case like there are teams that probably got better value out of either what they got or what they sent out, whatever. I know Jimmy Butler went to Golden State. I know Luka Doncic went to the Lakers. I know Anthony Davis went to Dallas. I think that ends up being the most impactful trade of the 2025 NBA playoffs.
If we're not including, like, are the Spurs excluded? Is the Fox deal not a deadline deal?
Ooh, no, I think they would have to be included.
I got to have the Spurs up there too. Okay. I don't know. We didn't really talk. We've talked about that before, but the more I think about that deal for Fox, the more it's like he doesn't have to be their number 2 guy to Wemby. Like, that isn't the only construction or the only way to view that deal. And so if you just got Fox for what they paid to get him, and again, we're doing this after he's already debuted and they looked good, like, that's up there for me as like a high level move potentially. But I think we might feel bad about this, but I think I agree that it's Cleveland, just because it's like, in terms of what's going to impact this season the most, I think a team that good adding a starter is like, that's hard to top. Again, Charlotte though, just wrangling a couple firsts for Mark Williams is like, you gotta love that one.
Is there a case for the Clippers if Bogdanovic is healthy and the Bogdanovic of last year?
They could be in consideration. If the best case scenario, I mean, of course we should say that for every trade we're evaluating. What about, I mean, like, would Golden State and or Miami potentially be in that group too? Of like, if this goes right, for certainly if Butler's great and the fit works, like, the Warriors go from a team that's not in the play-in to like maybe the fourth or fifth best team in the West. I don't know.
How wouldn't it be? I don't know what the odds of this would be. Probably 1 in a million. If we just got Heat Warriors in the finals,
Oh,
how incredible would that be?
that would be. That's the matchup. Now I didn't know I needed.
Or
Now I need
Mavericks
to see.
Lakers in the Western Conference Finals.
I mean, well, I don't think that's gonna. We this is another podcast. Like, are the Lakers like a sneaky? How good might the Lakers be if like the Williams thing works?
Sorry, what is the Lakers defense?
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah, you're right. We're too far afield.
I don't know if there's any other nominees here for. I think you could look at Utah getting good value, but it was just sort of just like on the Washington getting to. Are they the only team that without they have Kuzma, but like being
Detroit's in like that group too. Like good job with limited resources type of thing.
Oh,
all right. So let's go to the other side of this. Dallas is excluded. We probably should exclude the teams that didn't do anything. So that's going to absolve Orlando of having to maybe be in the conversation here. So who did? I'm like, I don't know. There's nobody like that really just. Well, it's Memphis probably, right?
Yeah, if you're going to ask me who had the worst trade deadline, I think it's Memphis.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it is Memphis. I'm looking for any other real candidates. The Bulls, I guess, but like, I don't know. Should we really expect anything different?
It's a good thing that neither of us immediately went to the Kings.
That's true. Good job, fellas. I mean, I think too, like in general, and I said this at the top, there weren't that many trades. There were some, but not many where it was, oh my God, like this is clearly like way out of balance. And so I think that's part of the reason it's harder to think of clear, like quote unquote losers. And there's just a lot of teams that are like mild winners, that the biggest bucket, if we're separating all these teams into like, deadline performance chunks, everybody's kind of in like, yeah, pretty good. Like the pretty good bucket's very full.
If I had to separate and like call not saying they're the biggest losers, but if I had to say they were losers, I would gravitate towards Atlanta. Yeah. I would gravitate towards Memphis. And I don't know, how do you feel about Philly?
I mean, they're a loser in a vacuum. It's just like the reason they had that's just the whole season went off the rails, and like Embiid's been hurt and Paul George is hurt and bad, and like they're in the conversation. I just don't think they didn't do like the Memphis the smart trade was the move that caused the most like, oh man, reaction, I think, like on social media.
We just watched it happen again this past offseason where they're just making these cost-cutting maneuvers, and they're not even half-baked measures. They're just uncooked measures. It doesn't make any sense. So can we try it this way? 2 different categories. Most shocking or surprising, riskiest move, not Luka Doncic, Anthony Davis division.
Well, most shocking and risky. Well, it might just be Butler to the Warriors. The risk is like insane because he could just be unbearable. Like we've seen Jimmy Butler just now he's gotten paid. He's got financial security. You could say like, what's his incentive to like give a shit or care? You know what I mean? Or try.
Don't you question him a little bit that he actively wanted to end up in Phoenix with what's going on there? Another loser, like the value of getting off Nurkic ended up being lower than we thought, but you can't escape that 2031 trade when your big additions are obviously future Hall of Famer Cody Martin, but it's just like,
I mean, I would nominate, I think for better or worse, I think both the Cavs and the Clippers have some risk, right? Like with Bogdanovic and ironically 2 former Hawks acquisitions are like, well, I don't know. What do you have anything? I think Butler's the most shocking to me, but what else do you got on that one?
So shocking. And I think risky is for me, I think is Brandon Ingram to the Raptors. I was surprised that the Raptors did this when I heard them linked, because all we heard the past few weeks is they want to be involved on these bigger trades as a facilitator.
Yes.
Then they were kind of linked to Brandon Ingram for like loosely, it felt like, but it was no, they're going to end up facilitating something. And no, they do it again. They trade like a team that far under 500 trade. I know it's not their own, but trading a first round pick. So I get it from a value perspective, but from a timing and also just fit perspective, I think which fit do you view as more strained or risky, or just the fit on the court? Forget the value. Ingram in Toronto or Butler in Golden State?
I think in terms of like floor versus the distance between the floor and the ceiling is bigger with Butler and Golden State. So I don't know if that means it's riskier. But Ingram just feels kind of ill-fitting, full stop. So I don't know if that doesn't. I guess I would just default to Butler, because like it could go so great, or it could just be like this was a catastrophic decision. Like those are both on the table, I think. What about in terms of risk? Is it possible that moving Middleton for Kuzma, forget the Kuzma part of it, but moving Middleton has like a really negative effect on the vibe and Giannis, and that's what and it doesn't work on the floor, and then we have to talk about Giannis being moved, like it's a year from now or whatever.
That's a good point. Would you have put that in for most shocking that because when you heard them linked to Kyle Kuzma and even Chris Middleton was involved at first, I kind of dismissed it as, oh, that's not going to happen.
It is. I mean, even have we talked plenty about Middleton's issues like durability and stuff, that was pretty surprising that they moved him, just because he felt like a core piece of the whole deal there.
It's funny if that domino meme, it's Giannis wants the Bucks to hire Adrian Griffin, and then it ends with the big domino of Giannis requesting out, because Giannis also co-signed the Kuzma trade apparently.
Right.
All the stuff that's happened in Milwaukee since the title, you never have to apologize after winning a championship, and I give them kudos for going after Dame, but there's a real chance that winning the in-season tournament is the peak of the Damian Lillard Bucks era.
What was the best draft asset that changed hands?
Phoenix's 2031 first round.
That was my answer too, damn it.
Well, here, let's do this. Most underrated move.
Let's see. I'm going to pull through here. I've already said I can't just go back to Charlotte getting 2 first-round assets essentially from
I think I was thinking more in lines of like players who will make an. I think Jake LaRavia to the Kings might be the most underrated one for me.
That's a really good one. I want to give another answer.
The Rockets getting Jaden Springer for 2 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a good one there. I think LaRavia is probably the answer because, what about Wiggins is too good to count. Like, I think Wiggins will just be really good and fit well in Miami, but he's like too good of a player to count as he's the main asset going back in the Butler deal.
Could it be? I mean, this is going back, but could it be the Nets getting D'Angelo Russell again?
I mean, he won him a game. Yeah. So that's a negative for them. So yes. I don't know. You got any other thoughts? I feel like
I was going to say most overrated move before we get out of here.
Ooh, most overrated move?
Do you want to know what mine is, or can you guess it?
Mark Williams.
Yeah, Mark Williams for the Lakers, I think, is the most overrated one.
That's one where, so I didn't see everybody maybe you got too much of a Lakers influence in your various silos, because I didn't.
Morton was all in on it too. It's that's
really
smart.
I didn't,
or at least I thought he was. I don't know, man.
Well, I was in such a haze trying to write at the end of the deadline that I didn't see any reactions to it, and I assumed everyone would say that's way too much for Mark Williams. I didn't realize that wasn't the consensus on it. It should be the consensus.
Even Pete Zayas from Laker Film Room was all in on it too, and I know that he's a Lakers fan, but that's one of the smartest guys in the business. I was just I thought there'd be more trepidation. I'm also giggling for anyone who's watching because Andrew Wiggins will be wearing Jimmy Butler's number.
Nice.
I love it.
That's cold. I like that. That's good for him. I really hope Wiggins is great for Miami. I think he feels like, and Kerr alluded to this, Wiggins feels like a guy that has, this might be a knock, and it might be why a lot of people will never like him, but he has basketball right sized in his life priority list. He understands this is his job and he cares about it, but it's he's cares about the right things more than that. It feels like. Anyway, I don't know. Anyway, smooth sailing to Andrew Wiggins is my final thought.
I don't know if it's more of a testament as to where the Warriors were at or what we think about some of the players they were targeting, but that we kept being hung up over on. But they have to give up Andrew Wiggins for that guy.
Yeah. I mean, Kerr said it. They don't win the 22 title without him. Now, you could say that about 7 guys on the roster, but it's very true specifically for Wiggins. So hopefully things go well for him in Miami.
You ready to take us out of here?
Yeah. Good trade deadline, Dan. We did it. We wrote a bunch. We talked a bunch. We evaluated everything perfectly. None of this will come back to bite us. Thanks, everybody that stuck with us for this 2-hour pod. This is always a really fun one to do. If you enjoyed this, remember, rate, review, subscribe. Dan said it at the top. Join our Discord. Links for that in the YouTube and podcast description. Spread the word. Tell your friends. Tell your enemies. Yeah, it's going to do it. Thanks, everybody. Shouts to Frank Ntilikina. Apologies to Jared Allen.